Okay, it being 7 o'clock, are the microphones working? Okay, it being 7 o'clock, I'll call this meeting to order for November 20th, 2017, and if you would please join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you, and I want to announce that this meeting is being broadcast live by Chelmsford Telemedia and taped for later rebroadcast. If anybody else is here, audio or video recording, if you could let me know now. Alana?
Independent as
Yep.
well.
We see two of them. Okay. Well, we have several public service announcements this morning. First, the Board of Health, Digital Safety and Kids. Looks like we have somebody who's going to be coming up to talk about that.
Hello, everyone, and thank you. My name is Amanda Glasser, and I'm a health educator for the Board of Health, and I also work for the school department. I would like to announce that we have an upcoming program as part of our monthly library series on Thursday, December 7th at 7 o'clock p.m. at the PAC, or the Performing Arts Center at Chelmsford High School. We are having a program on digital safety in kids, what's new, what's now, and what's next, presented by Ms. Katie Greer. Ms. Greer is a nationally recognized expert in internet and digital safety and technology, and she's also an advisor to multiple governmental and private agencies. In addition, Ms. Greer is the former intelligence analyst for the Mass State Police and the former director of Internet Safety. She has also been featured on CNN, Time Magazine, USA Today, and Parents Magazine, to name a few. This evening program for parents and community members, along with caregivers, will serve as a follow-up to Ms. Greer's presentation earlier in the day, where she will be presenting to all students in grades 8 through 12 on the importance of digital safety. It was decided to bring in an expert on social media as the most recent youth risk behavior survey that was conducted in 2016 for the students in Chelmsford High School for grades 9 through 12. It was found that 16.8 report having been threatened, humiliated, or experienced hostile behaviors from others electronically during the past 12 months. Over 33% of all respondents report spending 3 or more hours per day on different social media avenues. And over 25.6 report having sent or received a sexually explicit message or photo. This past spring, we conducted the YRBS, the Youth Risk Behavior Survey, for students in grades 7 through 8 at McCarthy and Parker Middle School. It was found that 16% of all respondents report having been bullied electronically during the previous 12 months, and 10% of the respondents report having sent or received a sexually explicit message or photo. Again, the program will be on Thursday, December 7th at 7 o'clock p.m. in the Performing Arts Center. If you have any questions or concerns, please contact the Board of Health. The phone number is 978-244-3328. And I've also left some flyers on the credenza over here. And I thank you for your time, and I hope that you have a wonderful holiday.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Okay. Mr. Stanway, about our Thanksgiving walk.
Yes, good evening. I'm Phil Stanway, lead steward, Chelmsford Open Space Steward, also director of the Land Conservation Trust. We have 3 events this week, well, Thanksgiving week. We have the day before Thanksgiving walk, which happens to be the day before Thanksgiving. That's 2 to 4 p.m. We'll be going out from Thanksgiving Grounds Forest, which is kind of next to South Rose School. We'll be do a 1-mile walk out to the rocks, where there'll be hot chocolate cookies and an excellent presentation on the history of Thanksgiving by Becky Warren of the Land Conservation Trust. We also have the opening of the amazing decorated winter tree scavenger hunt starts that day, where 13 sites in town have been decorated with 14 different trees, and you have to find 10 of them, shoot the picture and send it into our open space page, and there'll be a drawing for a $5 trophy, because that's all we can afford right now. And then Saturday we have Back from Grandma's. That's also at Thanksgiving Forest. We'll be leaving at 9 a.m. We'll be heading out through Thanksgiving Forest and out to the stone forts, which are behind in Great Brook, and coming back. That's about a 3-mile walk. great for kids. They can play on the stone forts. Since it's not Chelmsford, we don't have liability, which is even better. So enjoy those events and check us out on our website. And the tree hunt this year can be found at Tree Hunt 2017 on Facebook. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
You.
Okay, next, we're going to have an update on the holiday prelude. Colleen?
Perfect timing following Phil. So the following weekend after this great event, we have the Chelmsford Annual Holiday Prelude, which will be December 3rd from 4 to 6 right in the center. We close down all of the roads, and it's a safe walk. There is events all over the center. We can start with down by Fishbones, and they're giving out chowder. We have the DJ that will be right near there. There'll be tractor rides in that part. There is hot chocolate that will be one of the Boy Scout troops doing that over by the barber shop with some popcorn. And we'll also have Piney the Talking Tree. What else do we have here? We have Santa coming at 4 o'clock. He'll be brought in by the horse-drawn carriages that we do every year, and they're sponsored by many of the great guys in town that own businesses, the Rotary, Chelmsford Business Association, Michael Sargent, and, oh gosh, I'm going to forget somebody. Paul, help me. Trinity, yes. So they've been a long-time sponsor. So we'll have the McHugh Family Band also playing down by Santa. The tree lighting will be turned on at 5 o'clock. There'll be free cocoa and cookies over by Santa's house that usually Paul mans.
He's not Santa. He's not Santa. He gives out hot chocolate, right?
Yeah, no, he's the goodie guy.
He smells some cookies.
Yeah, he steals a few. There is going to be a story time at the Little Red Schoolhouse, and we will also have the Historical Commission at the Toll House. They have we'll clean it out so that they can do their little presentations in there. Journey Church is also going to be doing a live nativity scene at 5:15, and they'll have a choir over there. Within that church, they'll also have face painting, and that's all handled by our DECA kids from the high school. The old hotel porch, there'll be the quintessential brass band they'll be playing. And if I didn't mention what's in the village, it's Piney the Talking Tree, the tractor rides, free hot cocoa, and hopefully, the shops will be open. We do welcome donations. This is a free event. And we are in desperate need of volunteers for the committee. So this is a call out for a little bit of help. It's a fun committee. It's once a year, and it's a lot of fun. So if anybody has any questions, I'm happy to answer them.
Any questions for Colleen?
We've all done that, so.
Okay, I'm sure there'll be a great turnout. There
All
always
right.
is, and
It is. Let's pray
forward
for
to
good
it.
weather. That's the biggest thing. So thank you.
Even when it's bad weather, there's still a good turnout.
There is. Yep. Until Santa comes and the lights go on, and then we've been, the rain will make people go away. But anyway, so thank you very much for letting me announce that,
Okay.
and hope to see you all there.
Thank you, Colleen.
Thank you. Okay, next up is Brenda Lovering.
Good evening. I'm Brenda Lovering from the Chelmsford Garden Club and also co-chair of Chelmsford Public Garden. You all know where that is. It's 7 North Road, located where the old fire station was formerly. I'd like to introduce Monica Kent, who is co-chair of the Public Garden. Carol Canestraro, who is in the office audience, is our president, and our vice president, Cynthia Bryan, is handing out some letters of appreciation to the selectmen. Usually we're here to ask, but this month we're here for Thanksgiving and to give thanks. We would like to say thank you to the town officials, residents, local landscapers, Chelmsford DPW, Western Nursery, Chelmsford businesses for their dedicated support to Chelmsford Public Garden, and share with you some of our success. We are excited and proud to announce we have recently won 3 significant awards for this project. The Garden Club Federation of Massachusetts awarded our club the President's Silver Bowl for the Best Developed Civic Project of the Year. Also from the State Federation, we received the Virginia F. Thurston Landscape Design Award for outstanding pursuit in the area of landscape design for using a suitable plan in a public space. But the most exciting award and recognition we received was from the National Garden Clubs for the best community landscape design in the country. This mega acknowledgement, the William C. Welch National Award, was presented to the Chelmsford Garden Club for designing and developing the Chelmsford Public Garden with benches, lighting, handicap access, picnic tables, both deciduous and conifer trees, shrubs, spring bulbs, and perennials for year-round enjoyment. We want to give a huge thank you to everyone in our town, and especially our elected officials who really supported us. Thank you again, and happy Thanksgiving.
Well,
Any
congratulations.
questions?
Congratulations.
Thank you.
Very good.
Thank you, Brenda.
Okay, we're now at the open session part of our meeting. Mr. Regazio, I think I know what you're here to talk about, and we do have a public hearing on tax classification, if you'd like to speak then.
Oh, no, I have something else.
Okay. You surprised me then.
Greetings to the selectmen, selectwomen, and town manager. And I'm here tonight to talk about my rejected amendment at the recent town meeting. I was very unhappy with the warrant article transferring the entire $1 million to the stabilization fund rather than allowing one half of it, $500,000 of it, to be used to reduce the current year's tax rate. And again, in talking with several people after the meeting, they stated that my amendment was valid and in order, and they didn't understand why it was rejected as being not acceptable. I'm not a lawyer and I can't comment on that, but I am unhappy with that. And again, the town meeting is the legislative body of the town, and they are responsible for approving all funding, all spending, and I don't see why a transfer of funds to use in offsetting the current year's tax rate was not appropriate. As a retired corporate finance manager and a CPA, I recognize the need for a safety net, and especially in managing a large operation like Chelmsford. $128 million of spending. However, enough for a stabilization fund is enough. Let's not be excessive. The future is uncertain, as Confucius once said, and it was nice to have a stabilization fund to cover. A couple of years ago, we had an excessive spending on the snow plowing, and again, it was nice to have that. But again, let's have an adequate stabilization fund. Let's not have an excessive one. For information, I just turned 79 this past month. My wife and I live on an adequate fund, adequate pension savings, but it's a fixed income, and we do take advantage of all free cash, all extra funds. Actually, my wife clips coupons, so again, in order to maintain a stable current lifestyle. We, the taxpayers, especially the senior citizens of Chelmsford, like myself and numerous others, and there's many others like me in the town, need need all the tax reductions we can have. Again, based on the budget that we passed this past year with a $2 or $3 million increase in spending, most of it for the all-day kindergarten. I have no problems with that. But again, I think, I expect that the real estate taxes, I guess you're going to be setting them tonight, is probably going to go, I'm guessing, going to go up $100 to $200 per resident. And again, the $500,000 transfer to offset part of that would have been nice. Okay, let me tell you a short story about the feelings of senior citizens. Again, our perspective. And again, this is a true story, and hopefully you'll appreciate it. It's just a couple of comments. 2 retired GM executives were living in Florida. And a couple of years ago, they rented a condo in North Conway. They were good tenants. They kept the place clean. They didn't cause any problems. And at the end of the season, obviously, the owner asked them, if they were going to be returning for the following year, hoping, again, that they didn't have to look for a new rental. The 2 tenants, or the 2 seniors, had a very simple and concise answer. At our age, we don't even buy green bananas. Okay, you know, we have a short cycle, okay? So my request to you, when free cash is available and it rises in the future, as it generally does, I expect a major portion, or maybe all of it, you know, to go back to the taxpayers as tax relief. The tax rates keep on going up every year, and again, if we can get some advantage, some surplus cash, let's apply it to the tax rate. A $9 or $10 million stabilization fund is more than adequate in my mind. Also, and again, when the warrant is written next year, I would expect that the warrant article be written in such a way that the town meeting reps can use, and if they want to apply some of the surplus cash, you know, to reduce the current year's taxes, I think that's more appropriate. I don't like having to approve an amendment that you can't really change. Granted, the lawyer said I could have reduced the amount of $1 million, but that doesn't affect the current year's tax rate. So again, when the warrant is written next year, let's make the warrant written so that X amount goes to the stabilization fund, and even put 0 to the current year tax rate. Again, it's our money. Remember, we gave you the money. You're in control of it, but let's help the seniors and all the taxpayers in the town of Chelmsford. Thank you.
Thank you for your
I'll
comments.
expect any comments. I'll be glad to answer.
Well, this is not on our agenda to discuss tonight.
Okay, I understand.
So I do appreciate you coming and speaking to us about
Okay,
this.
thank you.
And you can be assured that, you know, we do consider all that information when we,
And hopefully you'll write the warrant article next year that way, so that there'll be no objections if someone wants to apply some of the surplus cash to the current year tax rate.
we can't make any promises about next year, but I'm sure you'll be watching.
Okay, I will be. Thank
Okay,
you.
very good.
Thank you, Paul.
Is there anybody else that would like to address us in open session? Oh, I thought those ladies were coming to speak to us. Brian?
Hi, Brian Latina, Precinct 4 Town Meeting Rep, and I have some, I'll hand these out to,
Thank you.
I had a couple of topics, and this one was sent to me by a former resident of the 101 Mill Road house. Rather famous house. I think you've heard me talk about it at town meeting. But I wanted to read a brief portion of this letter, and you have it in your possession, so for the record, it's been presented. Suggestion for the use of the Adams House at 101 Mill Road has been made by former residents of that home. Two ladies at the bottom of this letter, Joan Paley and Marianne Russell, who lived in that home in the 1940s, I believe, and were interested in possibly using that house as an inn or a museum. And I know that the home was up for sale by order of the Selectmen. And I wanted to correct what I believe is a little bit of a mistake in the determination that the town doesn't want that house. At town meeting, I was on a committee at the request of town meeting from a previous session, actually 2 years we spent on that committee. And the committee was charged with coming up with ideas about how to use the house. The town had bought it, and we looked at it and looked at the cost, and we were to come up with an idea about how to use it. As part of that particular town meeting, we should have had the session to describe what use we had of the house. But instead of having that during the report session, we did it during a warrant article that was requested by the Selectmen to actually ask for some money for doing the project that we were told by town meeting to just come up with an idea. And town meeting voted no to $20,000 towards coming up with a business plan. And that was interpreted by, I suppose, the Selectmen to decide to sell the house. The town did not want the house. It was a close vote for $20,000, but it wasn't a vote against keeping the property. So anyway, these ladies have lived in the house, and they had another idea for it with a possible use. And in the event that the house isn't sold, they were interested in possibly buying it, using it for a museum and or a house that might be used for an inn, so it could be used for historic purposes, for the legacy of the Adams family. Right? Second issue I had, any questions on that?
I think we're all set with that. Thanks.
Okay. Second issue I had, we're in the process over on Jesse Road of replacing a bunch of gas lines and some other things, and I did see a selectmen's meeting where they were discussing a surprise that we were replacing the gas company was replacing gas lines on Turnpike Road in my section of neighborhood. Just to be clear, my guess is, and everyone was kind of surprised at it, there have been gas leaks there, but there are other ones in town. My guess was that that section was being replaced in order to support the infrastructure necessary for adding almost 200 units along Turnpike Road, housing units. 168 units was just approved in a nice little pine grove off Turnpike in what was a formal industrial area and zone for that. Another area just above Jesse Road between Yancey and Jesse for another 10 units that'll probably be approved as well, and they've started working on that already. So just for clarification, that's my guess as to why they were putting gas lines in, and had very little to do with, they just happened to every 50 years swing through the area, since they're not doing it in other areas. I do express concern for the properties there. As selectmen, we should be looking out for the entire town, and my section of town is going to look like Andover right off 93 at Dascombe Road in a very short amount of time, 4-story buildings. You can see the beginnings of those, and 108 units being built on a cliff face just above Mill Road at 129. And just for a last point on the housing that's being put in the economic area, the 108 units is at top of a hill, almost a 9 to 12% grade. Impossible for a legal American with Disability Act sidewalk across from a handicap school. I'm very concerned about that. I understand the ZBA approved that property for a housing project that was part of the 40B program. And if you violate the American with Disability Act and get a variance on the sidewalk to approach that, that would be unfortunate. So thank you very much.
Okay, thank you. Okay, is there anybody else that would like to address us in open session? Okay, thank you very much. Time for committee vacancies.
There are committee vacancies on the following. The Board of Appeals has 1 associate member. The CCA Advisory Committee has 2 vacancies. The Center Village Master Plan Implementation Committee has 1 vacancy. The Civic Committee has 4 vacancies. The Community Action Program Committee has 2 vacancies. The Cultural Committee has up to 21 vacancies. The Energy Conservation Committee has 2 vacancies. The Holiday Decorating Committee has 3 openings. The Parade Committee is welcoming all applicants. The Public Relations Committee has 5 openings. The Recycling Committee has 1 vacancy. The Sign Advisory Committee has 2 vacancies. The Skate Park Committee has 2 vacancies. The Tree Committee has 1 vacancy, and the Vinyl Square Strategic Action Plan Committee has 1 vacancy. If you're interested in serving on a town board or committee, please apply to the town website or contact the town manager's office.
Thank you. Okay, we have 3 public hearings for poll petitions. Do we have anybody here representing National Grid for poll petitions? We do. Very good. Well, the first one is the Concord Road, so we can do that
Jeff
one.
Miller?
Say that again?
It's Jeff Miller, right? Him and Lamar are the builders.
Well, this is the gentleman from National Grid, and we're doing Concord Road.
Yeah,
first.
that's.
That, okay.
yeah.
Hi, my name is Dave Aguirre, and I'm representing National Grid. National Grid is asking for the town of Chelmsford for permission to install a pole. This is going to serve the house at number 77 Concord Road.
Okay. Okay. Do we have, this is a public hearing. Do we have anybody in the audience that would like to speak either for or against this poll petition on Concord Road? Okay, does anybody on the board have any questions for Mr. Aguilera about this petition?
Just in general, why is the pole needed?
To serve the house, they're going to be going underground from Concord Road to the property, and we bring our wires across the street overhead to a pole that's there, and then they go underground from there to their home. And it's
So the
pretty
home
far.
is-
It's pretty far down. It's pretty far off the road, also.
So this is a new home?
Yes, it is.
Okay, any other questions?
You have any, you have any problems with it yourself? No.
And I believe we did have an email from DPW that supports it, recommends approval.
I'll make a motion to approve
How
the,
about close the public hearing?
to close the public hearing?
I'll second the motion.
Okay, motion and a second, all in favor?
Aye.
Okay.
I'll make a motion to approve the pole placement petition on Concord Road for National Grid Plan 24391212.
I'll second the motion.
Okay, motion and a second to approve this poll petition. Any other discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Okay, thank you. Okay, the next one is the High Street.
This is very similar to the one that we just did, and what we'd like to do is National Grid would like to ask the town of Chelmsford to be able to put a pole across High Street, and this pole will also serve another customer. That customer's pretty far down off the road, and that's 159 High Street, and they're going to be going underground also from that pole.
Again, this is a public hearing. Is there anybody here that would like to speak for or against this poll petition on High Street? Okay, any questions from the board? Okay. Greg Glenn?
This is the second one where you referred to it as underground.
Yes.
Is this some sort of statute that new construction needs to be underground, or is this just the
No,
way you're doing it?
when we have private services like this, we don't, then the customer's not allowed to have their service in the public taking. So we come across and then we get fairly close to their property and we put the pole there and then they go off into their property.
So it could be underground or not underground in some cases? Or is it always underground?
No, it depends upon whether they want an underground service going to their home or not. We could go overhead services if they like.
Is that an
And-
extra charge for underground?
It's more money than overhead.
They do the
Now it's
work
getting fairly
themselves.
close, but
The homeowner?
yes.
You just bring the electricity to the pole. They take care of underground to the house.
Yes.
Okay, any other questions?
Make a motion to close the public hearing?
I'll second the motion.
Okay, all in favor of closing the public hearing?
Aye.
I'll make a motion to approve the pole placement on High Street per the National Grid Plan 24261260.
Second the motion.
We have a motion and a second, and I will also note that Steve Janley, the Assistant Director of Public Works, has recommended approval. All in favor?
Aye.
Thank you. And one more, the Locust Road.
Hi, my name is Dave Agnew, and I'm representing National Grid. We're asking the town of Chelmsford to relocate pole 2. There was an aerial easement on this one, so we'd like to put this pole in a different spot so we can hit the customers without crossing over other people's properties.
So this is the movement of a pole, not a new installation, okay. Again, this is a public hearing. Is there anybody here that would like to speak for or against this poll petition on Locust Road? Yes, come up to the microphone.
My name is Ann Gallo, and I live at 17 Locust Road. We got the notice about the pole. We didn't feel that the notice was clear as to where the pole was going to be. Okay. Since then, the builder had come to our home and spoken to me about where the pole was going to be, and I understand it's going to be on our side of the road, with the power going across to an existing pole. If that's what's really happening, then that's fine with us. We have no problem with it. But at some point, we thought the pole was going to be right in front of our neighbors, directly across our street neighbor house, and it would be like an eyesore in the middle of their property. So I just wanted clarification as to where it actually was going to go.
Well, it does have to follow what the plan says.
But what
So-
does the plan say?
right.
Because what came to us seemed to make it look like it might be right in front of our house. And so we weren't sure.
Okay.
All right, and so that
Miss-
was our concern.
Can you address that at all, Mr. Aguilar?
We can have somebody meet with the customer and confirm where the pole is gonna go. We don't wanna put a pole in front of somebody's house. So we'll be more than glad to meet with you. I can take your name and have you talk to the person that.
Is somebody here representing the builder?
Is there anybody here representing the builder does this one have is it for a new house that you're having to move that?
Yeah, but we just have to relocate it also, but
Mhm.
yes.
Okay. All right, so, if they can just meet with, the neighbor here, I'm sure we can put that in our motion.
Yeah, but do you think that the builder should be there too? I mean, not for any reason. I don't
Oh.
even know who the builder is.
Right, I mean, we've never required the builder to be
What?
here before.
Well, I think we have before when, and I don't have any idea where this one is, okay? So, and we want everybody to be happy, but I just think
Right.
that, I think all parties should be present, that's what I'm trying to
Absolutely,
say.
we can have that. I'm
Who's
sure
the
the
builder?
builder will,
I have no idea who the builder is.
I don't either as of right now, but we can find that out. The builder will be there. I'm sure he's gonna be just as interested in this
Well,
as.
if we don't know who it is, how do we contact him? That's my concern.
We'll get in touch with him.
Okay.
Well,
I'll make
it's
sure that
National Grid that's
builder
putting
will
up
be
the
there.
pole, not the builder, so. National Grid would
They're
have
not gonna
to.
put it up until they have a discussion. That's what I'm trying to say.
Right,
so-
exactly, but it's them that's gonna be putting it up, not the builder.
So is it, they're not putting the poll up until they have the discussion or until
Right.
there's agreement?
That would be,
Till they agree where there's gonna be positioned,
Okay, I just
correct?
want to be,
So that everybody's happy. If there's a dispute, I guess it'll be back here. If they agree.
well, or we could continue the public hearing if
That's
that's the
was
sense,
sort
if
of
that's
what
the
I
sense
was-
of the board until they have that discussion and come back in 2
We can
weeks.
continue the public
All
hearing,
right.
come back next time, sure.
Okay,
Mhm.
so you'll meet with the neighbor
Mhm.
and work that out and
Yep.
come back with
Sure.
a more defined plan,
Yep,
okay?
absolutely.
Okay, before you continue it, can we see if there's anybody else in the audience that would like to speak for or against this poll petition?
Darrell May at 191 Robin Hill Road. I'm just curious, based on all this information I'm hearing about these polls going up. I mean, despite that you closed out all these, you already made a vote for, you passed the other polls going up. I'm curious, like on Buttercup, they have transformers. ground
Okay, I mean, we're
transformers.
not talking about Buttercup, but I'll
No,
let
no,
you-
no, I'm giving you an example.
Right,
All right, so Buttercup has ground transformers for new homes, so why can't these new homes or these new poles have a transformer there? That way we can avoid power outages, to help alleviate the power outages that we constantly have here. in
I think that's a
Chelmsford.
topic that's way beyond what we're talking about
No,
here,
I'm-
but
I'm
I
just- I'm posing it-
understand,
I'm
yeah.
posing it to him, it's a concern, right? So it won't affect me, but I'm just saying, long-term wise, to me, logically, it would make sense to put something, if you're gonna go underground, put a transformer there so that in the future you could feed other homes.
Okay,
I don't know if have
Thank
a
you.
comment.
okay, is there anybody else that would like to speak for or against this poll petition on Locust Road? Okay, does the board have any other questions?
I'll make a motion to continue the public hearing on the Locust Road pole movement until the homeowner and builder have a chance to
Sure.
speak with,
And
meet
about-
with National Grid to agree on placement.
And we- could we,
Butter
could-
and the,
could, just continue it till our next meeting, and then we'll,
Until our next meeting
December
on
4th is the-
December 4th.
Is that going to be on the agenda for December? We can
Yes.
have that meeting before.
Yeah,
That'll give
yeah,
us
and-
plenty of time to
right,
do
yeah,
it.
right,
December 4th,
we would
okay.
expect, yeah, that would be done by then, and if it's
Okay.
not, then we'll have to continue it again. But, yeah, we'll look for you to be here then, and the neighbor, at least to send us a note if it meets your approval.
Okay.
Okay, do we have a second?
I'll second the motion.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. Any other discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
thank you.
Okay, we have a couple of reports this evening. First report is Richard Sullivan from Powers and Sullivan is going to review our fiscal year 2017 financial audit.
Good evening. Thank you for having me here tonight. What I wanted to try to do in a few minutes here is just to kind of give you an overview of how the audit went for FY17, give you an idea of the process behind it, so you can get a feel for the work that we do in terms of authenticating and making sure the numbers are correct, and also give you an idea of what I think was how the process went just from both the dynamics of my firm and the town. We basically come in and assess risk at various levels. Cash is assessed at high, maybe receivables not so high. The idea behind it is that we want to pick the areas of the audit that we think should get the most attention so that we do the job right. There's a whole process behind that allows us, it's called Ppc Peer Review, and basically we go through and create our audit programs designed to assess risk at what we think is the proper cycle. We also do 4 sets of transaction testing. We go through the revenue cycle, we go through the expenditure cycle, we go through the payroll cycle, and we also look at journal entries, which I'll talk about a little bit later. But the old idea behind that is to say, has the transaction been authorized? Has it been properly approved? Has it been posted correctly? Is the amount that paid, is that correct? And essentially look to see if the design of the system is as you would expect it to be with the checks and balances in place. We also do what's called substantive testing. And what that is like after year end, June 30th, we take a look at the cash balances and we try to tie those out to the penny. We do the same thing with receivables. We do the same thing with the capital assets. Same thing with OPEB, pension liability, warrants payable, all those other compensated absences. So those are what we call substantive testing because it's a balance sheet amount for which we want to ascertain if the amount is fairly presented. The financial audit from the standpoint for us went pretty smooth this year. We came in late May for the prelim, and we came in beginning of September to do the year-end work. In the prelim, we do all things that aren't date sensitive to June 30th, which means we can look at debt, we can look at the budget. If the OPEB report is a carryover, we can look at that. We do the transaction testing, as I mentioned, and we also do the single audit, which is mostly associated with the school because special education happens to be the largest grant that you have. We get all that done in the end of May. Come in September, and I'll mention September 5th, which is pretty good because we have to get the ledgers about a week before we arrive and to import it into our trial balance software. So basically the books are closed 2 months after year end. I really do think that Darlene does a nice job of getting the books closed and in order for us to do our work. The coordination I wanted to talk about of the audit process, what it is we come in and we're kind of like the Marines. We come in hard, and we try to get out. That requires reasonable cooperation with John, Darlene, and their teams. What I can share with you is we had great coordination of that. Her team and themselves were focused. They answered our questions in a timely manner, and their answers were correct and accurate. The kind of things that we do when you do an audit, about 80% of the audit has to be done the same way every year. Cash is the assets are the assets, liabilities are the liabilities. But we always try to throw a couple of curveballs in there just to make it different so that we want to see how they respond to a request for information we haven't asked for before. When we ask those couple of questions and we get the answer back timely, in a timely manner, like I'm talking within 2 hours, and of course it's accurate, that gives us the credibility that we're feeling comfortable about what we're looking at, and we don't have to worry about any loose ends. The major balance sheet items that you have on your balance sheet, the biggest thing is probably cash. It's $56 million. You've got 3 big receivables and special assessments, Chapter 90, real estate and sewer, which were all over $2 million in each category. Your capital assets at the end of the year were $226 million. And that includes all your infrastructure and also what we call vertical assets as well as equipment. 2 big liabilities on your balance sheet, the elephants in the room. OPEB, $48.5 million. Now, the increase in this from last year to this year was very slight. In FY16, your increase was $4.3 million. This year was only $480,000. And the primary reason for that is your discount rate, which is the rate that is used to calculate what you can get on an investment return based on the investments you have, was increased to 6.5% from 5.5%, which also lowered your total liability down too. Pretty significant. I could anticipate, and I don't want to steal what Dan's saying, that there's a chance that you could probably maybe use a higher discount rate because you've been funding your OPED. I think at year end it was $6.9 million in the trust, which is terrific. Your pension liability, which is your share of the Middlesex County retirement system, was just over $100 million at the end of last year. This is up $7.1 million from FY16. This guy I'm not as worried about under the standpoint that it's a big number, but MGL requires you to fund your pension liability by, I think they may have elected 2040. So there's a law in place that says this thing's going to be funded by 2040. The problem is with Middlesex is they're only 45.5% funded, which means their asset ratio to the total liability is much lower than a lot of other retirement systems that we see out there, which means you can probably see your appropriations going up in the future so they can meet that 2040 funding schedule. Debt was $95.2 million. Pretty reasonable, a little high at 11.4% of your total budget, but I'm not really worried about it because 2 years out, 3 years out, starting in 2021, what we call the out-year payments dropped significantly. They dropped $2 million one year, then another $1.5 million the next, which means this $11 million will probably be like $8 million. What you should be thinking about, in my opinion, regarding debt is you should hover around a certain level that you think is appropriate. Because what it means is if your debt gets too low in percentage as a percentage of your budget, that means you're not outlaying capital assets. That means maybe that your infrastructure's failing a little bit, or there's some buildings that should be built. So what I see from good policy perspectives, maintain a level of, say, 8% or 9% of your budget. And what that means is as debt falls off, new debt's coming on because the CIP is in place. If you were to say what's different between FY16 and FY17, the biggest thing is we had this thing called GASB 74 implemented. GASB 74 had to be implemented because you guys do have an OPEB trust. And what that required is essentially the same disclosures. 3 years ago, you implemented GASB 68. A whole slew of disclosures came out from that. Essentially, GASB 74 says whatever you did for the pension liability, you now have to do for the OPEB liability. So what this did is probably add about 6 to 7 pages to the footnotes in an RSI, required supplementary information. It talked about things like asset classes, what was being invested, the expected real rate of return on those assets. There was sensitivity analysis relative to the discount rate changing from 6.5 to 7.5 or 6.5 to 5.5. And then there's another analysis they do, what's called the healthcare trend rate, which says, what if the healthcare trend, rather than being 5%, was 6%, meaning the cost would be higher on what it would be 1% lower. These are all requirements that the GASB said we have to do. Plus, in the back, there were 3 more schedules added to describe what the ratio of assets is to the total liability, what the contributions were. So what GASB 74 essentially is the big bang for FY17 in terms of a change from FY16 to FY17. Audit results. I'll talk about the financial results in a second. From our perspective, This was a good audit. You have what we call an unqualified opinion, which is a clean opinion. I really do feel we had good coordination of information with the town accountant and the finance director. Everything was accurate, and I'm very happy to say the responses to our inquiries were timely. Very quickly, just to talk about the results of the general fund and some of the other funds. The town reported a $1.4 million loss on a budgetary basis. This compares to a profit of $1.1 million in the prior year. Now, revenues came in almost exactly as expected. I mean, it was almost right on the dime. Expenditures came in better than planned. Turnbacks, which is not spending the appropriation, having going back to fund balance, was $1.7 million. What you had anticipated to do during FY17 was use $2.5 million of free cash. You only used 1.4. So in some ways, this is actually a performance better than you anticipated when you put together the budget. Just with that $1.7 million, in case anybody's listening, sounds like a lot of money. It's only 1.4% of your budget. So what that means is that you came in at 98.6% right, which isn't bad. Unassigned fund balance, there was a little bit of discussion that with one of the citizens, was $14.2 million at the end of the year. This includes $10.6 million of the stabilization fund. With the stabilization fund, your overall fund balance is 10.75 of expenditures, which is a healthy mark. The GFOA likes to see fund balance 10% or higher. So you're right at it at this level. And the stabilization fund is put in with the, we call unassigned fund balance, because you don't have any real specific use for it. It can be used for anything upon 2/3 vote. So that's pretty good. And what I like is it maintains you're still healthy. And I think that supports the AA plus rating that you've got with S&P. The enterprise funds, golf and sewer did exactly what they did last year. Golf broke even. Sewer had a $500,000 loss. They had a $500,000 loss in FY16. The only thing that was really, I don't want to say surprising, is PEG sustained a significant loss. Expenses outpaced revenues by almost $1 million, or $982,000. And the bulk of those expenditures in PEG were related to salary. So that's a thing that we'll probably take a look at as we go into the future to see how that new enterprise fund performs. Mentioned the OPEB trust, $1.1 million was contributed. The fund now stands at $6.8 million. That's pretty good. And I think I heard that you're probably going to be putting more into that. I think that's terrific. Finally, on capital assets, you spent $6.4 million in addition in FY17. Construction and process, which was $2.9 million, consisted mostly of the modular classrooms. $1.3 million of new equipment was purchased. There was an emergency dispatch at the police station, fire alarm upgrade at the school, security cameras at the school, and there was a fire alert system put together. In sum, all of that equaled about $6.4 million. There was also $1.4 million in infrastructure improvements like sidewalks, roads, and drainage, and $653,000 in vehicles, which included a police cruiser, street sweeper, engine pumper, and a flatbed truck for the DPW. Okay, that's the financial statements as a whole. There's another report on your desk, or maybe you have it, I don't know, where there's a federal awards report. You spent $2.1 million of federal awards. Now, because you spent more than $750,000, you have to have what we call a uniform audit, a uniform guidance audit. And what that means is we have to test certain grants equal to 40% or 20%, depending on certain criteria, of your total grant expenditures. We tested special education, which was $1.1 million. Very simple thing. There's 3 reports in there. They have 3 opinions. Every single one of them is unqualified, which means all 3 reports were a clean opinion. On the management letter side, there's not much here. We have only 3 comments. One of the comments was resolved, which was a pretty significant comment related to COSO. When uniform guidance came out last year, they said you should have a documented protocol for handling federal grants that follows the COSO internal control structure. That was done. The student activity audit, which we are still recommending be done, has not been done yet. I don't even know if one's been scheduled. I'm sorry, I should know that. But that was still unresolved. And then we had the one informational comment which relates to GASB 75, which if I could just talk about for a second. GASB 74 and 75 go hand in hand. but they staggered the implementation. They said 74 starts in 17, 75 starts in 18. I mentioned a $48.9 million OPEB liability. What that liability represents is the difference between the ARC that should have been paid into a trust and the actual amount you paid. And there's been a gap, somewhat of a gap every year between what was actually put in versus what was actually paid. That added to the liability that's on your balance sheet right now. Well, we're going to rip that off and throw in the entire OPEB unfunded liability, which at the end of FY17 was $72 million. That $72 million is now going to be sitting on the face of the financial statements, not buried in the footnotes, and we're going to just take away what GASB 45 used to report. It doesn't, in my opinion, change anything in terms of the bonding rating companies or anything like that, because honestly, before 74 and 45 and all these things, 74 and 68 came about, these things have been pretty well vetted by the rating companies. They knew what was going on. I think what this is doing, though, is, and in a good way, is drawing attention to people who pay attention to municipal financial statements to what the seriousness of the liability is. I mentioned earlier I'm not worried about the pension plan as much because it's covered by MGL. It's the OPEB plan that's tough because there's no MGL that says you have to fund it. That's a local level area, and I don't anticipate the state ever getting involved with it because they have their own OPEB liability to deal with. So take about 300 hours worth of work and 20 minutes of discussion. That's where we're at right now.
Okay, anybody have any questions, comments?
It sounds like we're fortunate with a lot of our employees here.
I agree
I'd like
with
to
you.
thank them for their work. And
I agree.
makes your job a lot easier, apparently.
It does. It does. When you're working with clients who have the same sense of urgency as you do, it really makes the job go well.
Okay, Glenn?
Just as a bottom line, just average, how do we compare to last year at this time?
About the same. Your overall fund balance, unassigned fund balance, only went down $200,000. And on a budgetary basis, you lost money, but your unassigned fund balance only went down $200,000, which means that you're at 10.75% of your total fund balance. I mean, personally, I'm an accountant. I'm conservative. I like to be conservative. But at 10.75%, you would consider that to be healthy and getting better at healthy, because what I see with AAA communities, and I don't know where that's going to be with you guys, but when they get into the 14, 15%, that's when Moody's and S&P considers an upgrade. But AA plus is not bad.
Okay, I see at least one member of the Finance Committee here. I don't know if you had any questions that you'd like to ask of about the audit?
I have no questions, but I do want to thank John and Darlene, listening to the results, especially the turnaround time, and how they were on top of it and stuff like that. It gives me a sense of comfort. So
Okay.
thank you.
Okay, thanks. And Dr. Lang, anything?
Oh, I'm good.
Okay, thanks.
Okay.
Oh, okay, I didn't see. School committee member back there. Any questions? Okay. All right, appreciate it. How about Darlene and John? Do you have any comments you'd like to make about the audit process and what we're going to have to look for next year?
What I'd like to do is take the opportunity. I want to, because I never give them. I do give them kudos, but I know they're always like so humble is my staff. The people that work in my office, my assistant payroll administrator and the accounts payable clerk, they just do a fantastic job. They actually really were working with the audit team more than I did. The audit team would go to them and pull invoices and getting reports and all that. So they just, they actually make me look good. I mean, they are my day-to-day engine that makes everything work every day. I'm just back there just kind of doing all the other backdoor stuff, but they really do the day-to-day, and I just want to give them, say thank you to them for working really hard. Like I said, they actually make me shine, and that's, I'm proud to have them in my, as a team to work with. So, thank you.
Okay,
Thank
thanks for
them.
Good evening. I want to thank Mr. Sullivan for that report. And again, following along the lines of Darlene's comments, you often see me at a lot of public meetings, town meeting. You don't see a lot of my staff, and if some of you come to visit me at times and you do see my staff, but just want to acknowledge them. Kim Pease, our assistant treasurer, Christine Wedge, assistant collector. We have 2 clerks in the tax collector's office, Bonnie Stedman and Lauren Halloran, and I want to thank them for all their work. Like Darlene said, with the right people in the positions that we have, they make us shine because the cash book is maintained well, collections are maintained well, so I want to acknowledge their work tonight, and thank you.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so thanks for that report. I guess the next thing is kind of related to that, is a report about OPEB.
Hi, thanks for having me. Parker Elmore here from Odyssey Advisors. I'd happily walk you through a 50-some page actuarial report, but I thought it might be easier to walk you through about a 15-page quick summary of it all. If you have questions on any of it, ask away. Don't feel like you have to wait to the end. The obligatory who we are slide. It's our first year working with the town. We do this for about 250 of your peers across Massachusetts, as well as a couple of hundred more across the U.S. OPEB is a big thing. GASB 43 and 45 came out in 2006, effective for most folks in 08 to 10. GASB 74 and 75 you heard a little bit about. We'll talk a little bit more about it here. The GASB 74 and 75 do impact the results of the report you just got. And the reason for that is, as Richard described, we changed your discount rate. Why? Why we change it? Well, we changed it to basically get you on a glide path to GASB 75. So it wasn't like we just did it for random reasons. So again, as I just mentioned, it does impact it. Again, as Richard described, it really mirrors 67 and 68, which is on the pension side. Honestly, if you took the words pension, replaced them with OPEB in the statements, they will look very much the same. Same exact concepts, moving liabilities to the balance sheet off the notes section. And as Richard described, personally, in my opinion, I think his as well, it's not going to really impact the rating agencies or the bond community, because anybody who was buying your bonds knew how to flip to the notes section. It's not like the liabilities are hidden. We're just moving where they are. So I don't think that's going to be any big deal. So the good news part of the presentation, your liabilities came down significantly. A couple of reasons. One, as we talked about, discount rate. When discount rates go up, liabilities come down and vice versa. So changing your discount rate from 5.5 to 6.5 reduced the liabilities that we show by about $18 million. If we'd gone the other direction, would have increased them by probably about $18 million. Hence the sensitivity analysis that we spoke about in the GASB 74 RSI. Did a good job of funding. You went from 3.7 to about $6.3 million of assets, and you continue to do so, and that's great. And we'll talk a little bit later about how you guys compare to your peers around the state in terms of what you're doing. So you've made a really good job in that regard. The expense side of the equation, which really goes through the income statement, kind of like you spoke about the ARC, that went from about $8.2 million down to 4.6. Again, a very significant decrease. Comes all again back to the discount rate. And again, the fact you guys made some plan changes on the Medicare product, those premiums were expected to go up by 20% over the period. They actually went down. So again, you guys have made some, you have both aggressive changes on the plan design side, discount rate, funding. So you guys are actually managing your liability. And again, going back to the rating agencies, if I'm Moody's, Fitch, S&P, what I want to see is, what are you guys doing to manage your liability? Some people just cover their ears, cover their eyes, and just, I don't want to look at this, the numbers are too big. Those are the ones who are not going to have favorable rating adjustments. Folks like you guys that are actually taking action are the ones who are going to look better compared to your peers. The key elements, I guess, in the GASB 45 is you did have a number of covered retirees go up. That's to be expected. Although you are fairly mature in terms of your population. You have about 900 or so covered retirees and spouses today in the plan. Over the next 40 years, we expect that number about 20 years from now to go about 975, 980, and then it will drop back down to about 900 over the next 40-year period. So you've really kind of hit your peak. It's going to go up slightly and come back down, I guess is my point, in terms of the number of covered people. We did make a couple assumption changes, and this is where I always make my caveat that assumption changes will change what I put on your balance sheet. They do not change the cost of your plan. And what I mean by that is this. So PARAC has asked everyone around the state to update the probability of people terminating in a given year or retiring in a given year. People are still going to terminate or retire whenever they want, regardless of what I use for an assumption. They also asked us to go to a more conservative mortality table to reflect the fact people are living longer. People are going to live just as long as they well please, no matter what I decide on a mortality table. And the same thing again, GASB 75, actuarial cost methods, I promised there will not be a quiz. Under GASB 45, we had 6 different what are called actuarial cost methods, how we allocate costs between the past and the future. Under GASB 75, we are allowed 1 actuarial cost method. So we decided to use that actuarial cost method. It seemed like a pretty obvious way to go. As far as the assumptions, we talked about going from 5.5 to 6.5, $18 million change. Termination rates are just the probability of leaving employment. So I'm working here, I'm 42 years old. What are the probability I stay till I'm 43? Retirement rates, I'm 57 years old. What's the probability I retire this year or I stay employed? And that changes each and every year. And then election percentage. What percentage of your people are actually going to elect to take benefits when they retire? Your prior evaluation assumed 100% of everybody eligible at retirement would take benefits. We cut that assumption down to 95. That's something we'll probably want to revisit in the future. I don't personally think that many people are going to take the benefits. A lot of people will. They're great benefits, don't get me wrong. But they are also paying 40%. So good benefits or not, people still don't have unlimited sources of money. And some people are going to say, I love the benefit, but I also love to pay rent, or I love to eat, or whatever. Not everyone can afford the benefits, is my point. Healthcare cost inflation, the last 5 or 6 years, 5% has probably been too high. Recently, we're starting to see a lot of people with 8s and 9s on renewals. We'll see next valuation where you guys come in. Left to my own devices, I would probably have the healthcare cost assumption around 6%, but the actual community is in the 4.5 to 5 range, and I don't really particularly want to be on an island by myself at 6% because the reality is if I'm at 6 by myself and things come in at 5, I get sued. So I'd rather be at 5 with everybody else. Let's just be honest about it. The funding comparison. This is kind of how you guys compare to everybody else. And everyone says, oh, gee, we should fund. And kind of like Richard, I'm in the same boat. We're conservative. We want more funding. Let's be honest about it. But you guys are about 8% funded. 8% funded right now puts you basically in the top, 8 to 9% of populations in the state of Massachusetts. So when you look around to your peers in terms of where you stack up, you are doing better than 90, 92% of your peers. So I know it doesn't always seem that way, but as I always tell folks, don't get caught up in the headline numbers. Look at the trend. You guys have gone from 3% funded to 6 to 8. You're making slow and steady progress. And if you just continue on this path, absent any changes and everything goes as expected, about 30 years from now, you guys are around 67, 68% funded, which compared to Middlesex makes you look like a dream. But the point being is this is just a methodical process. It's just putting the money in year after year. It's boring. You've seen all the ads for Vanguard and stuff. It's a very boring, predictable, easy process. Again, another comparison to other clients just to show people normal cost is the value of benefits being earned in a given year for that year of service. So I try and explain it to folks. So your employees today are earning $2,284 today in terms of their future retiree medical benefits. So if I'm making $42,000 working for the town, I effectively have a $2,200 deferred compensation number effectively that I will receive when I retire. That changes every year based on experience and age and things like that. But the point is, compared to your peers, that's averaging around $4,200. So your benefits are not quite as rich. Also, the fact that you guys are using a 6.5% discount rate, many of your peers were in the 3.5 to 4.5 range, which also tends to drive down your costs. As you see the discount rate, you guys are at 6.5. You got a couple here at 7, 6, a lot of 4s, some 3.5s. So again, 4 is about the average for the state right now. That will probably go down in the short run. And we'll talk about GASB 75 in a second and GASB 74 that Richard spoke about. Generally, that will have a downward bias on discount rates that we use for these studies. For those who are funding, it will have a positive impact generally. So in your guys' case, you're funding that you got to go up. Many folks who are not funding will be going down. And again, it doesn't change the cost of your plan. That $18 million we took off your liability, it's not like we made your plan any cheaper. It's exactly the same cost as it was the day before. So I just try and tell people that so they don't think, oh my God, we saved all this money. No money got saved here. We just changed what we disclose. Your benefit payments per covered retiree, about $4,700. Our statewide average is about $4,800 and change. So you're pretty much right on the number. And you can look at some of your peers and kind of where they stand. And you get an 811 for a funded ratio compared to about 4.5% around the state. Again, you're doing very well. Just some basic plan costs to show you the number of bodies in each retiree medical plan that you have. Again, you've got your Medex 2 costs at $273 a month. Many of them we see run in the $350 range, and those who are still on Medex 3 can run in the mid-5s. So you guys have done a really good job of managing that liability, because that's about 85% of your costs occur after the age of 65. So everyone gets so hung up on the fact is, hey guys, if we cut our network blue premium by 10%, what's that going to do to my OPEB? To which I usually answer, not a lot. That doesn't mean you shouldn't do it, but my point is it's not an OPEB thing, because your active medical costs are usually, in an average year, probably twice what your retiree medical care costs are. So you should still do it, but it's not going to get you the OPEB headline number you're looking for. The Medicare costs are where all the money is, so that's where you have to go if you're trying to save Medicare costs or OPEB costs. So the normal cost per active employee, we just show you a quick exhibit just to show you how it varies by where employees are located. Not surprisingly, the town is a little bit less than public safety. And it's not anything special. It's because public safety generally will retire earlier and work a shorter career. Therefore, you have to compress their costs over a shorter period of time, and they receive the benefits for a longer period of time. There's nothing rocket science about it. It's the exact same thing you see on your pension plan. So the GASB 75. Now, these are tentative numbers because we haven't done your GASB 75 valuation yet, but I just wanted to show you some examples of where it's going to go. So as Richard described, you currently have $48 million on your books right now for a net OPEB obligation. GASB 75 is going to come, and we're going to put $73 million and change on your books. Well, right now you have $72 million in your RSI in the back of the report. All we're going to do now is move that to the balance sheet. Yes, it's going to make the balance sheet look ugly. No denying that. But anybody who's buying your bonds knows how to flip to the back, so I wouldn't get too stressed out about it. Again, there's a lot of new terminology on GASB 75, and again, we're not going to have a quiz on this. I didn't even put in the main one, which they changed the word assets to be fiduciary net position. I guess assets was confusing, so now we've gone for something that makes a little more sense. Actuarial accrued liability is now total OPEB liability. Unfunded is now net OPEB liability, so a lot of new terms. Again, the same kind of concepts on service cost. I just had this conversation with a client the other day, and we had a big hour-long meeting about GASB 75, and I tried to explain the underlying concepts and calculations are exactly the same. A liability under 45 is a liability under 75. Calculation's identical. Service costs, identical. All those things, nothing changed in your plan. It changes how we reflect certain items. So your service costs are going to go from about 169 to about 176, not by much. Your employer payments go from about $3 million to about $3.2, again, not much. All pretty predictable. GASB 75 didn't really change the plan itself when you get right down to it. And my last little slide here, just because I had a client the other day who told me, I thought this went away. The Affordable Care Excise Tax, the Cadillac tax, the word you wish to call it, whatever that may be. It is still here. It has been delayed from 2018 to 2020 under current law. That can change. It was supposed to take effect next year in January, no longer. What it means is, as currently written, it does impact your liabilities because we have to reflect the law as it currently exists. For a single individual plan over about $11,850 or a family plan almost about $31,000, every dollar by which your premium exceeds that amount, there is a 40-cent tax, so a 40% marginal rate. So if your plan, a family plan was $32,000, on the extra $1,000, you would owe a $400 tax on that. The key element for this is these ratios or these levels go up by general CPI. Medical care costs generally have gone up at greater than general CPI. So while your plans may not be at those costs today, over time they will catch up. Now, again, if I had to forecast and put on my political prognostication cap, I would tell you that much like the alternative minimum tax used to be from 1969 to about 2016 when this went in, it will get kicked down 2 years at a time. We'll kick the can down the road a little bit further. Because the problem is in the world of congressional budget windows, this raises a lot of money. So it's very difficult for them just to repeal it because you go, well, Democrats hate it, Republicans hate it, unions hate it, governments hate it. Everybody hates it. How is it still here? Because it raises a lot of money. It's simple math. Now, letting it take effect, there's not a lot of votes for that. So my guess is we'll postpone it to 2022, 2025. Again, we'll see how it all plays out. This is a law as it's currently written. This is what we value. It does not have, again, materiality is an accounting term, so I don't want to steal Rich's world, but I would just tell you that, in the overall scheme of things, just so I can give you the exact number here, it's, it's out of a $72 million liability, it's about $445,000. So this is not the place I would spend a lot of your time worrying about. I'm not saying to ignore it. There are a lot of reasons to manage the costs of your plan, but the excise tax is not really the one of them at this point in time. I think there's a lot of other reasons why you don't manage those costs, but I wouldn't have the excise tax be it. Again, questions, comments, concerns? I mean, there's a lot of stuff Richard already talked to you about with GASB 74 and 75, but happy to get into finer detail, because who doesn't love more OPEB?
Okay, all interesting stuff, right? Anybody have any comments, questions?
Just for my own knowledge.
Yep.
Excise tax, does that still include FSA contributions?
Yes.
So do we have anybody getting close to the excise tax level right now?
We're approaching it. Right now, a family plan is close to $25,000, and so as you start approaching 2020, looking at trends, we will be nearing it, and our insurers are looking at it as well.
But you have to add on top of that any contributions they make to an FSA. So
Right.
which one's at 28,000 and they put 2,500 in the FSA, they've hit it.
Right.
And that's largely why many employers
Okay.
have gotten rid of FSAs for that exact reason,
Right.
because
Right.
you don't want to have Jimmy decides to put $2,500 in an FSA and you get dinged with a $1,000 tax over something you had no control over. So what a lot of people have done, gotten rid of the FSAs, which is unfortunate, but that's the unintended consequence of the rule.
Sure. Okay. Any other questions, comments from anyone?
Well, thank you for having me.
Can I ask you that
Yeah.
question?
Yep.
You were talking about the discount rate.
Yep.
Some of the other towns are using. And I noticed some of the other towns that were really underfunded were using, well, you have like Dover, they're using 7%.
They're very well funded.
So do they are allowed to use 7 because they're so well funded?
There's two things. So under GASB 75, the rules are a little bit different than under on 74 and 75 both. So your discount rate under 74 and 75 is really based on several different issues. One is the funded status of your plan. How much money are you setting aside each year? So even if you might be 40% funded today, just to pick a number. If you're not going to put any more money in, and you just exhaust those funds, you will not use as high a discount rate as if you're putting money in. So your funding policy is a major component. Secondly, how are you investing the money? So in your guys' case, you guys are with PRIT, which has a very aggressive portfolio. You guys get a big benefit from that. If, on the other hand, I have another client of mine, they are funding, but they have all the money sitting in cash. So they are not getting to use a very good discount rate because the money isn't doing anything. Then there's what are your benefit payments costing? So it's a combination of all of those things. So in your guys' case, you have a decent fund balance, you're setting money aside, and you're invested in an aggressive portfolio. All those things let you use a much higher discount rate than, say, somebody else who isn't. Because for those who are not funding, what we have to use is a 20-year municipal bond index rate, which right now is about 3.15%. So we'll round up and give them 3.25. But as I said, a 1% change in your discount rate can move your numbers by easily 20% or more. So, and if you are a blend, which is where you guys fall in, you're at 6.5 in your case because you're funding very nicely. If you were not funding as much, that might drop back to 5.5 or 5.25. So it's a convoluted calculation, but basically we try and figure out what is the single discount rate that would equate to your level of unfunded benefit payments, basically say from years 2074 and beyond, and all of your funded payments through 2074. And that's how we get to that 6.5% that you're currently using.
So the long and short of it, because of the way we are funding it,
Yep.
we were able to get a bump in our discount rate.
Correct. It's a
lowers
choice
the
about how
size
much.
of the pool. Right?
Exactly. It's how much money you're setting aside, and it's how you're investing the funds. If you guys kept putting away the same amount of money, but you went to a very conservative asset allocation, we might go down to 4 or 5.5%. If, on the other hand, you decided to put in more money, we might be able to get to 7.25. So it's a fine line. There's no, as I tell everybody, there's no right or wrong answer, because the one thing I don't know is all the other capital needs of the town. I mean, I think you guys are doing a great job, but this is one item of a balance sheet of which you guys have many.
How do we get to 7%?
Well, is it also affected by the fact that we can't take that money out for other purposes?
Well, yeah, the irrevocable nature of it is definitely, if it wasn't irrevocable, we wouldn't be able to count any of it.
Okay.
So in order to count it, it has to be in a trust that is irrevocable, exclusively set aside for these purposes, and cannot be used for any other purpose until, basically the fund has been, until the liability has been fully settled, which is obviously never going to happen. At least, I shouldn't say, never say never, but highly unlikely, let's put it that way.
All right.
Well, thank you all for having me.
Darlene and John, you want to make any comments about OPEB at this point? About how we're going to get to 7% like Ken wants to?
How many more millions would we have to put in, John, to fully fund the art?
Yeah, that too.
No, just to say, I think many of us remember sitting through town meeting several years back when the decision was made to go and invest the OPEB assets in Prim. And I don't know that everyone at that time, it was a long debate and everyone fully understood it, but just to give you some perspective, as I mentioned at the last town meeting, last year everyone knows that the stock market has been on a roll. And it's at record highs, and we know that's not going to happen every year, certainly. But last year, to show the power of putting the money to work and having the Commonwealth's Prim Board invest it, last year the town earned $737,000 in investment returns on the money that we've put into OPEB. And again, that's, I'm realistic, I'm a finance person, that's not going to happen every year. It's a function of the market in general, but just to underscore Parker's point that, last year, the PRIT fund, which is the Pension Reserves Investment Trust, it's basically the same fund that's for the Commonwealth of Mass state retiree benefits. Basically, it's the pension trust for state workers, Mass teachers' retirement. There's a board that and a staff that they focus on investments. That's their job all day long, 365 days a year. And last year, the performance for the year ending June 30th was just under 13% net of fees. So it just shows you that the power of putting our money to work versus just putting it in cash or CDs. Yes, it would be super safe, but we'd never grow this into a good amount. So I just wanted to make that point.
Thank you.
Very good, John. Thanks.
Okay. Anything else? Okay, thank you very much. Good information. Okay. The next item on our agenda is the tax classification public hearing, and we're going to begin it with a presentation by, who's going to begin the presentation? Mr. Chase or Mr. Reen? Chase.
Good evening, Madam Chair, members of the board, and Town Manager Cohen. For the record, Sam Chase, Board of Assessors, speaking for the board at this hearing. Our board consists of 3 members, Elise Magnet, Jack Duffett, and me, and day-to-day operations are managed by Chief Assessor Frank Areen, who will be presenting this evening. State law requires that your board set the annual property tax rate. Board of Selectmen policy says that you do that only after reviewing the effects of available exemption and tax rate options on the different property classes. To help you make your decision this year, Frank has revised the annual presentation to include more data showing how those options impact property taxpayers. We hope that you'll find this enhanced package informative. Before getting into the presentation, we'd like to take just a moment to review how we arrive at an assessed value for a property. There are 3 methods used to determine real estate value. They are the sales, cost, and income capitalization methods. The law requires that assessors use at least 2 of these methods to determine the value for a given property, whether it be residential or commercial. Now, many people assume that residential assessed property values are determined only by looking at an individual property sale or only by doing sales comparisons. Those assumptions are wrong. Assessors use the cost and sales comparison methods together to arrive at a value, as the law requires them to do. The valuation process is not arbitrary or subjective. Assessors collect real estate sales data to determine the market. That's the sales method. They use individual property data that includes building size, age, construction quality, physical condition, and use restrictions to determine structure value. That's the cost method. They take property characteristic and sales data together. They apply relevant building cost and depreciation schedules, and then use standardized methods confirmed by statistical testing to arrive at a market value for a specific property type. Then, the Department of Revenue reviews the assessor's work and must certify that all real estate values meet the legal standard of being at full and fair cash value before the tax rate can be finalized. That's how it's done. On behalf of our board, I want to express our sincere gratitude to Frank and his extremely capable staff for the outstanding work that they do to ensure that residents are treated fairly and courteously. Residents who have questions concerning property valuations should feel comfortable in contacting the assessor's office at 978-250-5220. Frank and his staff are always available to assist you. And now I'd like to turn the balance of the presentation over to Frank, who will be very happy to answer any questions that you have. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Sam. Madam Chair, Board, Paul. Here we are again, a year later. Public hearing held every year by law. The purpose is to provide an open tax forum for public discussion. After the discussion and review, the Board of Selectmen, decides whether to tax all classes of property the same or different rates. The areas we'll be reviewing this evening, the ones we've reviewed in the past, review the evaluation requirements, abatements and compliance, review with data relating to the split tax rate and the minimum residential factor, historical view of rates, and the effects of the various shifts on the tax rate. The exemptions and abatements we review as well. The small commercial exemption is an exemption that involves limited to the commercial properties. This is something I'll be expanding on in greater detail later on in the presentation. However, it involves commercial buildings that are valued less than $1 million with 10 or fewer employees at all of their locations. The exemption is granted to those that comply, the balance of which is applied to the remaining non-eligible commercial parcels and the remaining industrial parcels. The residential exemption is granted only to the principal residents of properties. There's a slight change in this a year or two ago with the Modernization Act. It went from 20% to 35%. The average assessed value of all residential class properties is established, and then the percentage adopted by the board is applied to the properties whose principal residence is in the town of Chelmsford. Excluded from that would be seasonal properties, rental properties, anything that has a principal residence not in Chelmsford. The open space discount adopts up to 25%. It works very much the same way as the residential. Open space is land not otherwise classified, maintained in a natural state. Up to 25% of that can be exempted, and that's passed on to and borne by the rest of the residential class. Town of Chelmsford doesn't, from an assessment standpoint, does not recognize open space. We all know what it is, a generic term that's used fairly often, but from an assessment standpoint, we don't recognize it. So it's something that is sort of a policy decision. Different communities can recognize it different ways, whether it's residual land, land in excess of zoning, that sort of thing. The commercial property owners, this is something I've been submitting for the last number of years. We submit the I&Es, we mail them out each March or the beginning of each year. We send out about 600 forms, roughly 322 return for a compliance rate of 53%. That's pretty consistent with past years. Again, the residential exemption, spend a minute on that, is, as I said, up to 35%. The average valuation of all the residential parcels is calculated and then applied to those that qualify. There were roughly 15 communities that adopted this exemption. Most of the communities are, as I said, seasonal communities or communities that have a large rental inventory. Examples would be Truro, Tisbury, Somerville, which has a high rental inventory, Nantucket, and Malden. This next slide is a slide you've seen in the past. It shows the historical view of the levy share back from 2009 to 2018 projected. It shows the tax rates for those years, as well as the shares for the CIP, the residential, the total levy. It has the state ranking. The Department of Revenue furnishes us with that information. For last year, we were number 68. As I say, there were 67 communities that had a higher average tax rate than Chelmsford. As it stands now, with a single tax rate, It's projected to be about almost $7,200. This next slide is slide you've seen in the past. It's the impact of the tax shift on all the major classes. Once again, using the figures that we have right now that are estimated. These will probably change as we begin to make adjustments on the tax rate, but these numbers are preliminary. It kind of shows the shifts going from a single tax rate all the way to the maximum that we can implement, which is a 150. And it shows at different assessed levels. A residential at $200,000 roughly reflects a typical condominium price that you might see. And moving through that up to $300,000, $350,000, and $400,000. $400,000 is roughly the average assessed value here in town. It's $399,500 for fiscal 18. The other two are $750,000 and $900,000. Again, obviously reflecting commercial industrial properties. You can kind of see that the taxes for the residential begin to decline as you move through the split shift scenario, and the commercial industrial begin to pick up additional taxes. This next one is it's a new slide that shows the same kind of information, only in a bar graph form. You can see it goes up in 10% increments from 100 or single tax rate to a 150. You can see the flat tax rate, and then if you move to 110 and 120, the tax rate begins to increase for the commercial industrial and begins to drop for the residential, and along that with the tax rates that correspond. Small commercial exemption. It's exemption up to 10% of the valuation of eligible commercial parcels. To be eligible, the commercial parcels must have a valuation of less than $1 million and an average annual employment of no more than 10. This exemption is in addition to any other tax policies that the board may adopt. The exemption granted is borne by the other non-eligible commercial parcels and all industrial parcels, not by personal property and not by residential. Just to give you a sense of it, the commercial properties, we have 431 commercial properties, less altogether, that is. 431 altogether. Out of those, 335 are valued at less than $1 million. We take that list and match it against the list that's provided to my office from the Department of Unemployment Assistance, where they provide us a list of businesses of fewer than 10 employees. So we match that against the 335, get that down to 115 to 120 parcels that would qualify for the small commercial exemption. That's a preliminary review of it. I'm confident that number is going to go up, given the data that's supplied, that gives us the data that clearly they're covered by this exemption. However, I'm confident there are probably other parcels with 10 or few employees that would be added to this list. So this would probably grow over time. A couple of communities that have it are Avon, Auburn, Dartmouth, Somerset, and Westford, our neighboring community. This next slide, don't normally like to get too bogged down in process, but I thought this one might show it how it's done. Some assumptions. I assume, for the sake of this slide, a 10% exempt percentage. You can see that in the top part there, we have the tax rate calculated in a typical fashion, the levy divided by the full and fair cash value of the town, and shows a single rate of $17.96 for both the commercial industrial and the residential and open space. In the event that the 10% small commercial exemption is adopted, you have to back out first the personal property, since that's unaffected by the exemption, isolating the commercial industrial, and you recalculate a new tax rate once you've backed out how much it's going to be exempted. That tax rate of $18.06 is then applied to all of the commercial industrial parcels. For those parcels that are eligible, we subtract 10% off the valuation, multiply it by the $18.06, which gives that reduced amount for the obligation. For the parcels that do not comply, they have the full valuation and also use that same tax rate, and their tax obligation is increased. You can kind of see that the tax rates for the residential and the personal property are unaffected by this particular exemption. Just to muddy the waters a little more, let's introduce a potential tax shift and also a commercial exemption. Tax rate is calculated very same way. We have a 1756 for the residential, assuming a 10% shift for the commercial, industrial, and personal property, it would go to 1976. And then we calculate for the small commercial exemption in much the same way, backing off the amount to be exempted, and then it's just applied to the eligible parcels. So in that scenario, the residential and the personal property are once again unaffected, other than the split tax rate, of course. This next slide is a variation of an earlier slide, and it kind of introduces, once again, the small commercial exemption to a split rate scenario. I've incorporated in here. In the boxes, it kind of shows the commercial industrial. When you compare it to the personal property at 1796, the commercial industrial at 806, it moves up in incremental steps. They're relatively close in the tax rates. The next, I've also incorporated that into the assessed value for, once again, 304,000 residential properties, and the commercial $750,000, one eligible, one not eligible. You can see for an eligible parcel, it'd be 12, based on even just the single tax rate, $12,000, almost $12,200 versus $13,500. And as you begin to move through the 110 and 120, you can see them beginning to escalate kind of in lockstep. This next graph sort of illustrates one of the points I wanted to make, that in a split shift scenario with also a 10% small commercial exemption, the rates aren't that different from one another, from the split rate of the industrial and the personal property and the exempted rate for the small commercial exemption. This next slide is an interesting slide. I was asked to prepare this. What this shows is the first, obviously, Chelmsford across the top. This was fiscal 17 data. That first line there of half a dozen communities going from Billerica to Carlisle are abutters to the town of Chelmsford. The succeeding ones are abutters to that community and outside of that. What this shows is obviously the residential and open space ratios. To the far right, the last two columns, the CIP shifts are in place there for all of those communities. One of them is a typo halfway down. Dunstable, in fact, has a 1, not a 99. And then to the right of that, you see the excess levy capacity for each of these communities. The Chelmsford one, the 466, should look familiar. We had that last year. And the rest show the various amounts of excess levy capacity for all of those communities. Any questions?
Okay, before we open it up to public hearing, to public comments, any questions for Mr. Reen? Go ahead.
On the last slide, anything that you saw in there, surprises or things that stood out that maybe weren't looked at before?
Yes. I didn't realize as many towns had excess levy capacity in to the extent that they do in terms of all these others. For instance, when you look at some of these, $36,000 for Westford, maybe even $60,000 for, Tewksbury. Those are all rounding things for the penny. There's always, we have typically, this year right now, we're sitting at around $32,000 in excess levy capacity. You can get as low as 4. It's simply a rounding thing. And that's what those low numbers reflect. But when you get into Billerica at $9 million, Lowell at 16, I wasn't so surprised. But some of the other communities are $3 and $4 million. I was surprised at the number of communities that leave that much money there. That surprised me.
Frank, can you just explain excess levy for people that might be watching?
Sure. Excess levy capacity could be one of two things. We have a tax rate last year of $17.92. The way you come up with the tax rate is you simply take the amount we're going to raise in property taxes, divide it by the full and fair cash value. Of course, you're going to come up with a number that's great, that's going to $17.92, and then beyond that, place it to the right of the decimal point. We can't have that as a tax rate, so we have to bring it back to $17.92, multiply that times full and fair cash value. That gives us our true how much we're going to raise. So you compare that to the maximum amount by law that we could raise, and that's the difference, essentially a rounding. The other option, of course, is like what Chelmsford did last year, or town meeting did last year, was to vote money into the excess levy capacity in order to bring the tax rate down. Essentially pass on the savings to all taxpayers.
Any other questions? I have a couple questions. On the I don't know what slide number it is. It has the residential and CIP levy share, where it has our ranking in the state from, it's 68 for last year. Now, you said that was for the tax rate or the tax bill?
That was for the tax bill. That compared
Okay, 'cause I think
for
you said tax
17.
rate,
Yeah,
so-
that's right.
Okay.
Yep. And what they simply do is just multiply the projected, the tax rate that was certified last year times the average assessed value, come up with a bill, compare it to the prior year, and just rank it high to low.
Okay.
They furnish us that every single year.
Okay.
We were at 68 in 2010.
Yep.
So really,
It's been
where we
stable the
rank in the
last-
state is pretty stable.
Yep. All those, yep, that's right. It's always hovered right around there with some exceptions.
Okay, and another question I have is on the slide about the small commercial exemption. On the third bullet point, the small commercial exemption is in addition to any other local tax policy options available.
That's why I wanted to make the point that the commercial exemption can go along with the splitting of the tax rate.
Oh, okay.
Yep.
So that's the other option.
Exactly.
Okay, there's not anything else that we can do outside of.
You could do any combination of these.
Okay. Great, go ahead.
In the presentation, I think you said the maximum was 1.5.
That's right.
But I noticed up there's a number of towns, I think, that say 1.75.
That's correct.
Why is that?
The Department of Revenue basically establishes what the minimum residential factor is. When establishing it, they set it at, they establish how much we're going to raise, the percentage that we're at, call it 80% just for round numbers. And if we were to go to 150, what would the residential factor be? It would be 70. Then they calculate what the residential factor is for that, and they tell us whether we can go to the 150. And they'll tell us if we can go no further. The only way you can go further is if once you've started, you'll see some communities here that have actually less CIP than we do, but yet have a greater shift than we could currently do. That was acted in a number of years ago to give a town an opportunity to go in excess of 150% if they want to meet the lowest residential factor historically that we've had. We can do that, but we would have to have had a split rate for several years in order to qualify for that. So they don't allow us to go, if we adopt some provision tonight or in 2 weeks that allows us to split the tax rate, in succeeding years, we can begin to give some thought to, or this board would give some thought to, on whether we want to go greater than 150 if we should want to.
So the 175s are historic because they started earlier?
That's right. Tewksbury, Lowell, Billerica certainly are examples of that.
So looking at the list, if you count the towns that are contiguous to us, there are 3 that split it and 3 that don't split it.
That's right.
And Carlisle, they don't really compare, so we'll take them out. So 3
Right.
out of 5 do.
Yep, that's right. The other thing surprising was some of the smaller towns that have a relatively smaller CIP. There aren't many, but they decide to split the rate too. Yet there are some with larger ones who don't. Boxborough, they're made up of 23% of their CIP, yet they keep a single tax rate. There's one other one that had Sudbury. Their commercial industrial base is about 6.5%, and they have a fairly substantial split. And that bottom stands are about halfway
So
down.
of all the towns, about half do and half don't?
I've never looked at it in that sense. It doesn't always seem to be a rhyme or reason to it. Sam just informed me there's 115 communities in the Commonwealth that split the tax rate.
How many was that? 100?
115?
Less than half.
Third?
Okay, if there's no other questions from the board, this is a public hearing, so if there's anybody that would like to address the board about tax classification, now is your chance to do that. Okay.
Members of the board, Douglas Hausler, I'm representing the Chelmsford Business Association as a member of its board of directors, not as an attorney. I know it's a surprise to you. Every year when one of you were running for office, you appeared at the Chelmsford Business Association annual candidates night. And the big surprise question every year is, where do you stand on classification? And every single one of you had answered, we don't think it's a good policy to adopt a split rate. So I guess my question is, have any of you changed your perspectives on that?
Doug, I don't think that's an appropriate question to ask us right now. As you know, this is a public hearing, and we should not be relaying what our potential vote would be before hearing all of the public input.
Well, it would only, because it would maybe reduce the amount of things we do need to talk about if it's really not, if anybody had justification for the reasons they would have changed. That's what I'm more interested in hearing about.
I understand, but that's the way it works. I mean, I think, quite frankly, we would be in violation of our due diligence if we didn't listen to everybody's concerns.
I understand. I'm not asking for a ballot vote. I'm asking you where you are at this moment. Before you've heard things, is anybody leaning towards changing their mind? I think that's a fair question. It's transparent. That's all we're asking for.
I don't know that I would consider that a fair question, because I don't know that anybody on this board should indicate how they might be planning to vote without hearing all the public input first.
Well, I'm disappointed by that response and the fact that there's going to be a lack of candor like that, so blatant. But that's your policy. That's fine.
Okay.
You know, we have policy issues tonight, and what I hear are great sound bites for politicians seeking to curry favor with residences, but that soundbite leaves a very, very nasty aftertaste. The whole issue of tax classification is divisive and discriminatory. It also is just poorly founded. The Department of Revenue itself states it has, quote, serious doubts about a tax system that allows commercial and industrial classes of property to be taxed at a higher rate. That's the Department of Revenue standard. That's a quote from the 2005 subcommittee of former selectmen that reported to their Board of Selectmen at that time. That DOR study also states that classification is not good for public policy and, at some point, raises constitutional issues. That's addressing the fact that it's discriminatory in nature. That's what classification does. It divides people. It divides a community. Further, though it's not the primary factor in making locational decisions, it certainly serves as another impediment to attracting and retaining businesses if you adopt a policy of classification. You've spent a lot of time in the last several years advocating for how to attract businesses, especially to the Route 129 area, economic development. Why would you purposely choose a policy that is an impediment to that? That is just illogical. The Board of Selectmen Subcommittee in 2005 specifically addressed the use of services as a factor that you should consider when you're deliberating whether or not you should adopt classification. And they said specifically in that report, the use of services is a factor that must be considered when determining a policy regarding taxes. So let's be practical about that. You're going to impose potentially higher tax on commercial and industrial property owners who don't really receive a direct benefit from the use of the schools, who don't receive a direct benefit for trash removal, just as two examples. And there are others. So there are services that are provided by the town, and rightfully so. They're services that everybody wants to have. But those are services that are not taken advantage of by the commercial and industrial property owners directly. If you're going to discriminate, you know, why not choose on giving seniors an exemption because they don't have kids in the school? Well, we don't do that. It's discriminatory. We want to have great schools. We want to support public schools. We want to put our money as a community pulling the oar in the same direction. What you do with classification, if it becomes adopted, is basically go against the tide. You have some people paddling forward and others against the tide. It doesn't make sense. There's a very important quote that came out of the Worcester Board of Research that was adopted by both the 1995 subcommittee that studied it here in Chelmsford, the 2004 subcommittee that's considered it, and the 2005 subcommittee of the Selectmen that studied it. And they all adopted this perception or policy issue. And this is the most important thing, I think, for all of you to consider. Because if you're trying to help the residential taxpayer, classification isn't the solution. Quote, while lowering the residential tax rate and raising the commercial and industrial rate provides short-term relief to residential homeowners whose property values are rising rapidly, which is what we've experienced over the last 2 years here. The evidence shows that they will end up paying even higher taxes in future years as a result of discouraging business investment in the community. 3 separate reports, all of which say not the best approach to adopt. But what isn't discussed here is that classification doesn't raise any additional revenue. It just shifts what you're going to be allowed to collect. So what isn't getting addressed here that would really help the residences is everybody advocating in a much more positive manner and a unified manner, quite frankly, for more state aid. It's actually appalling that the town of Westford is having its state aid, I think it's approximately $8 million or greater than Chelmsford, and Paul may know, I don't think I'm too far off, is that correct? So we are actually not getting the same benefits for our dollars as a community, but Westford is getting $8 million more. We're supplementing their system. That's appalling. That's where we should be focusing your efforts and ours as a community together, not fighting about, well, let's put a little burden on this one and we'll put a little burden on that one, and it's politically expedient and because it's permissible by law. No one's challenging the process or the methodology that our assessors do. Everybody's being taxed at fair value. No one's suggesting that anybody should deserve a break or less. You know, if it's $1,000 of residential value, we pay the same amount for commercial. Whatever the value is, it's the same amount. It's equal. Having adopted a policy that says we're going to treat everybody equal is exactly what we wanted. It's equal in numbers and it's equitable in policy. If you adopt classification and shift, you go against both of those tides. You know, the decision in 1998 to eliminate classification in Chelmsford was because it's a policy that had been carefully studied and considered. And I will add, I don't think there's any other community in this area that's ever studied classification more than Chelmsford. And that decision in 1998 has been almost 20 years now, reaffirmed time and time again. It's a bad policy. The Selectmen have uniformly rejected it time and time again. I don't understand if there would be any reason or justification for abandoning that position. I haven't heard any. Certainly none's been discussed with me or, to my knowledge, to any members of the 225-plus members of the Business Association from any of you justifying why you would change your minds from the past where you've committed that it probably isn't a good policy. Everybody's entitled to change their mind, but I think everybody's also entitled to have the benefit of knowing what the justification for that change of position would be. The decision back 17 or 18 or 19 years ago put an end to a policy that pitted business versus homeowner. That decision put an end to a blatant policy of governmental sanctioned discrimination. That decision put an end to a policy that was charging commercial industrial property owners to pay more per $1,000 of value, even though the very same commercial and property owners did not enjoy the significant services that many residential owners received. To date, I have not seen any justification as to why classification should be reinstituted. If the concept is being raised because tax bills on average are again increasing again, classification is not the solution. It's an approach or a rationale that is simply at best, it's simplistic. It doesn't address the core issue, which is how to raise the required amount of money for the services that are required, that are going to constitute the quality of value we want in our town and what we expect from our town government. And that's a decision that all of us should be sharing equally, not disproportionately. Again, it doesn't raise revenue, but in the short term, it gives a short-term solution, but gives a long-term negative effect. So very briefly, and I was trying to understand the small business exemption, and I want to give you the perfect example of that. According to what I heard, and if I'm wrong, I'm sure the assessor will tell me I'm wrong. I don't mind that. I'm learning like everybody else. I can have a business that has a $950,000 property with 9 employees and qualify for an exemption. And right next door, I could have a property worth $1 million with 11 employees, and I could potentially be taxed 1.5% to 1 ratio. My $18 rate can become a $27 rate. Is that correct?
Depending on the percentage adopted.
Depending on the shift. When any one of you can explain the rationale behind doing that to a business, we'd like to hear that. But you've got 225 plus members in an organization that cares very deeply about this issue, and we're going to hold you accountable for it because you've all represented in the past that you don't adopt it, that you won't adopt it because it doesn't make good financial prudent sense. It's not a good business decision to make, and it's not in the best interest of the town or its residents. So I'm going to be very interested, as I'm sure our members are, in hearing the rationale that any of you have if you decide to deviate from your publicly stated positions. Thank you.
Thank you.
Brian Latina, Precinct 4 Town Meeting Rep and resident 15 Jesse Road. You can change your mind. I heard that we made this arrangement almost 20 years ago, 1998, I think I heard. There's been a lot of changes since then. I think a cell phone was about the size of a brick back then. You didn't have laptop computers. I think Apollo computer was just leaving. The Arian Lang was probably still here. Recently, town meeting passed an overlay district near my house, and we want to put 6-story buildings in there and attract businesses. I think it's time for you to consider looking toward those businesses as contributing more to the community than the residents. And I heard 225 members of the commercial properties. We have 431 commercial properties in town. I think I heard something on the order of we have 15,000 residential properties in town, and we just added 648 rental units in town. We saved a little bit of money by stopping trash collection at multifamily properties at more than 4 units. We saved money that way, $75,000 at town meeting, because they're commercial. It's kind of a tax increase. I don't think that will hurt the next business coming in by considering changing your opinion. There's a lot of residents that don't make the kind of money that commercial properties make. There's a lot of residents that are on fixed incomes, and our tax rate in the last 10 years has doubled. My pay has not. Businesses have an opportunity to leave if they don't like to live in our community and use our services, police and fire. We bought extra fire engines to reach the top of some of these buildings that we've stuck in town since 1998. My house didn't get any taller. Built in 1965, I believe. My property tax has doubled in 10 years. It'll double again in 10 years. Consider changing your opinion, because we've changed a lot in the last couple of years. Our town manager even pointed out that we added 648 new residential units, mostly rentals, I believe all rentals, in our community in the last 2 years. More than ever. More than ever. We also hired a $120,000 employee because Billerica has one, a marketing employee, to bring businesses into town. And I'd consider, I think you should consider thinking about hiring. We hired that employee. I think I used the term, I think $1.2 million over the next 10 years. That's what he'll cost, or she will cost, compared to giving the residents a little bit of a break here. It's not much. I think I calculated 0.4% change in our rate compared to the commercial rates. So there aren't too many $1 million houses in town. There are a very few $1 million or more businesses in town, and I don't think you're going to scare anybody out of town that's going to build and live and work in a 6-story building. Thank you for considering the residences and possibly changing your mind about who should pay a large part of the bill going forward, not back to 1998. Thank you.
Thank you.
Jeff Hardy, 5 Maple Avenue. Jeff Hardy, Hardy Doric, 22 Progress Avenue. Brian, you're right. Businesses, taxes have doubled.
Please address the board. We're the ones that are going to be voting on that.
Well, okay. It was just said taxes have doubled. Yeah, they have. And it has doubled for business as well. But if you do a shift, and we can use that 150 or 140, the tax savings to a resident is going to be less than $500. So Jeff Hardy, 5 Maple Ave, might save $500. But Jeff Hardy, 22 Progress Ave, is going to have to pay $12,000. Doesn't make sense to ask 15, 17% of your taxpayers to make up the difference for over 80. It's discriminatory, as we've already discussed. So please look at the real numbers and understand that we're not 6-story buildings. I'm a small businessman just trying to make my way. Thank you.
Thank you.
Evening, my name is Roberta Marengi, and I live at 110 Crooked Spring Road. And I am a recently retired school teacher from the Central School right here in town. And I just have to say, I was very excited to read the Lowell Sun yesterday about the possibility of a split tax rate. Myself and most of my neighbors are now retired, and this was a really nice piece of news. I just want to say I'm very supportive of it, and I'm very glad that you are considering it. So thank you for any support you give to it.
Thank you.
Good evening. Steve Flynn, 13 Dayton Street, Preston's free rep. I won't ask the board how they're thinking, how they're going to vote, and I won't dictate to you. Let me explain something for the silent people here in town, is our senior citizens. Right now, we have 25% of our taxpayers, seniors. In 3 years, it'll be 30%. A lot of folks heard me talk about the senior circuit tax credit. There's 295 towns in Massachusetts, and we're number 1. How do you get number 1? It's by the income of the seniors in this town. I'm a board member down the senior center, and when I talk to the seniors, they constantly bring up the taxes going up. This gentleman said the residential property would save $500. We haven't had a commercial split rate in this town for 20 years. We don't see business flocking to this town because we have a non-commercial rate. But they do flock to the towns who have a commercial rate. Okay? It's got to be a reason for that. Thank God we have the process of hiring someone in here that's coming into this town here. And I think it's a plus. But the seniors, think of this. Last year, 900 seniors, we got $950,000 back from that. The only way we got it back because of their income is so low. They never had a 401k. It didn't come until 1985, 86. They have a little Social Security. So put that in back of your mind when you make your decision, okay? This should have been done 20 years ago, and we had, at that time in 1998, we had 3 reps that night were voting for the split rate. And during the course of the evening, that night, it was changed. But think about it, okay, guys? It's so important because a lot of seniors in this town don't have the money, and $500, trust me, is a lot. Thank you.
Thank you. Anybody else that would like to address this issue?
I have 2 questions.
Can you come to the microphone, please?
With difficulty.
Okay, perhaps, okay. Then if you could just speak loudly and we can relay the questions.
In relationship to
Your name, please?
John Cronin, 13 Brook Street. In relation to the Chelmsford $17.92 tax rate, how does this tax rate compare to the approximate other tax rates of the other 355 mass cities and towns?
Well, the 1792 tax rate is the fiscal 17 tax rate of last year. How it rates as a tax rate compared to other communities, I don't have the answer to that. What was shown in the presentation was how the residential average tax amount last year of roughly $6,900 compared to other residential average assessed properties throughout the other communities within the Commonwealth. And we were at number 68, which is to say that 67 communities had a greater tax rate than ourselves, and the remaining less.
Are you using the number 3? What are you using as the other number for what's the total number?
Of communities?
Yeah.
Well, we know there's 351, but there are fewer than that that probably are part of this because some of them are regionalized.
So we're number 68 out of 351, approximately.
Well, something like that.
Okay, thank you. So you don't know how the tax rate?
No, the tax rate is simply a mathematical function. So it can be a little bit misleading. For example, Weston, they have a lower tax rate than we do. Nobody in this room would like to want to change bills with a Weston taxpayer.
Yeah, of course, for the assessments, yes, I understand. My second question is, to the board, what, other than this split rate, which financially doesn't actually do much, what other efforts, if any, are being implemented to reduce the residential tax rate? Are there any other efforts, or is this the only effort?
Well, this is part of what we're able to do by law. There is not a lot of things that we can do by law as far as reducing, the tax rate. There are exemptions that certain people that fall into certain classifications might be eligible for, and those lists always come out with the tax bill. Do they not, Paul? About elderly and veterans and
disabled,
disabled and so forth.
So there are no other efforts?
Well, I don't know what you mean by no other efforts, because I think there's quite a few options there that
There's
people.
options, but
Yes.
we know those options already exist.
That's correct.
Okay, those options already exist. Is there anything being thought of?
Again, that's what this board has to deliberate on, and if there's anything legally we can do, we'll obviously consider that.
Is there?
That's what this board will decide. I mean, Mr. Reen gave us an example of a few that we can consider. There's, as I said, there's not a lot other than what's already in place. Do you have any other public input? Given the amount, did I hear somebody say something? Would you please come to the microphone?
I'm Helen Blasioli, and I'm at 19 Augusta Way in the Village at Meadowood. And I've heard a lot of things tonight, and I'm not prepared, and I was not prepared to say very much. But I would like the businessmen in this town to know that we have a lot of, and I want you people to know or think about, that we have a lot of senior citizens that live in Chelmsford. And in the Village of Meadowood, we've had a lot of people who have had to leave this town. And they've been very heartbroken about this. The reason is, I heard this gentleman over here say that they don't even get garbage pickup, or they do get garbage. We only get garbage pickup from the town of Chelmsford. Nobody but the residents in Meadowood. We plow our own streets, we take care of our own water, we do it all. And we have, and so has been a lot of other over 55 communities. And I think that needs to be taken into consideration, that you've got a lot of seniors in our position when you're doing the businesses. They're getting money in, we're not. Most of them are retired. But I wanted just to point out to you guys, we take a heavy burden too, more than a business does.
Thank you. Is there anybody else? We do have another one.
Donald Van Dyne, 29 Brentwood Road. I'm not here as a member of EDC. We have not had a formal discussion regarding tax classification. I'm also a CBA member. I'm not here as a CBA member either. I'm personally here because I'm very concerned that this becomes an issue as us against them. And I need to remind everyone that many of the business owners in town actually live in town. And they feel the impact not only on the residential side, but also on the commercial side. What I'm personally very concerned about is a message that we are now sending out to the commercial interest of town that might be either interested in staying in town or want to relocate to town. This is not the time to consider splitting our tax rate. Having a unified tax rate sends a positive message to the commercial interest to say, yes, Chelmsford is open for business. We would like to encourage you to come to relocate to our town. Again, it's not about us against them. The commercial taxpayers of this town most likely are also residential taxpayers. Please take that in consideration as you consider your opinion. Thank you.
Thank you. Is there anyone else? Okay, given the amount of discussion this evening, and it probably will prompt more, I would suggest we continue this public hearing rather than vote this evening. Everybody okay with that? That is,
Will we also get opportunity to ask questions tonight of some of the speakers? Because it's lost if we don't speak tonight. Whatever discussion they gave, we lost 2 weeks from now.
well, the point being, this is, a public hearing is not a public debate. So,
There's no debate. It's just a question of responding to some of the information that was provided by the audience. And in 2 weeks, no one's going to remember it.
I think we will. I mean,
I'd have to agree with what Glenn is saying. I mean, this is some pretty heavy information, and if anyone who's following this discussion now, stay tuned. 2 weeks from now, you're going to get chapter 2. I think that if you have some questions or some comments about the presentation.
well, the presentation, absolutely, you can ask questions. I guess I don't understand what questions you might have for the people who gave public input.
Well, if you let me ask them, and you'll know. If you find them out of order, then you can cancel them, I guess.
Okay, and I just, I would remind you that, we should not be even
I mean,
indicating how you
my
might be voting.
questions really are in reference to the data. Some of the questions that came up, even though they weren't pointed at the data, they insinuated that some information was contrary to the data. And so I like to ask them.
Okay, although, I mean, as I said, I don't want it to become a debate, and I think we can find data that would basically support almost any judgment that somebody would try to make, but.
Well,
go ahead.
that's for members of the board to decide for themselves, and
That's right.
it's a matter of the people, residents in town deciding on what they believe or they don't believe. But I do think that, we should have the opportunity to talk about and not debate some of the information that was presented. That's all. Very simple.
So what is your question?
One question I have, Frank, and I don't know if you are the one who has the answer, but perhaps you do. And Mike, I think I heard one time that there's a very small percentage of the residential owners who have children in the system at this point.
In the school system?
Yes. Do you know what number that is? I heard it was like 17% maybe.
I actually don't know, Glenn.
Is anyone,
That's been the number that's been out there.
bandied about
Yeah,
from time to
somewhere
time?
between 17, 18%, which
So,
would be
I-
right, given the declining enrollment in the school systems. That number certainly hasn't increased, given that we've had some slight increase in the housing supply. So I would say that's a solid number.
So it was presented as an argument against splitting the rate, that businesses don't have children, they don't have children in school systems and supporting it. Well, it says that 83% of the residential properties in town that are taxed, they don't have children in the schools either. And therefore, I don't think that that's a really a valid argument when you're using that as one of the points that are against this. Another point was, if you look at the information that's up there now, it says that it was intimated that one of the reasons that we should not split the rate was that if you do have a split rate, you will discourage companies, commercial properties from coming into town. If you look up there, Billerica, which is at 1.75, has a much better ratio of commercial to residential than we do. If you look at Bedford and Littleton and Wilmington and Woburn and Air, they all have split rates, high split rates, but they also have fairly robust ratios of commercial to non-commercial to residential, which would say that although it would make sense, and I don't disagree that it makes sense, that if you have a split rate, you are somehow throwing a log in the road of commercial development. It is not the primary reason of why a company would move somewhere or not. It is probably a reason, but questioning whether it is the reason. If you look at, Lowell is an anomaly because it's such a huge town. But if you just think of recent times, Kronos moved from Billerica, from Chelmsford to Lowell. And although they don't own the building, indirectly they're paying monies because the owner is there, and the owner is paying 1.75. And these towns that I mentioned are mostly ones that are 1.75, which meant that they've had a split rate by your description for some time. It has not deterred business development in those towns. So I counter that that's not really maybe a totally valid reason why not. And just in general, responding to a general comment of why people change their mind. And, I agree with one of the speakers that, people do change their mind. They grow, that they acquire knowledge as they go forward. And the world does change. And you shouldn't expect people not to seek out and find as much information as they can about what the world is that they live in. The world, is changing dramatically today. If you go back probably to the 40s, 5 years go by and not much changed at all. But in today's world, things do change. And I think it's a credit to public people who really have to gain a lot of knowledge about many things continually. And, they should be able to change if the data suggests that. So, did I offend you in any way?
I think you came very close to coming to debate, but that's fine. Okay, if we don't have any other questions for Mr. Reen at this time, we could entertain a motion to continue unless there is a sense to vote this evening.
I'll make a motion to continue the public hearing until our next meeting on December 4th.
I'll second the motion.
Okay. We have a motion and a second. Is there any further discussion this evening?
Is it possible to get a copy of the CBA's discussion tonight?
I'm sure he would provide it to you.
Thank you.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. All in favor? All in favor of continuing the public hearing to December 4th? Aye?
Aye.
Okay.
Very good.
Was that an aye from you, Glenn? To continue?
Yes.
Okay. Okay, thank you. We'll see everybody again in 2 weeks. Okay, on to town manager reports.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just a couple of quick reports.
If you folks
We'll take a moment.
could
We'll
leave
take a moment.
silently, please.
Just a couple of quick reports this evening. The first one has to do with the 101 Mill Road parcel that town meeting authorized the board to dispose of, and we issued an RFP. Mike McCall, my assistant, handled it. He was assisted by Nick Parley in terms of showing the property and so forth. Short story is we did not receive any bids on the RFP that was issued, despite the fact that we had issued we had shown the property to about a dozen or so different parties during the viewing periods that were offered out there. The disappointment was surprising because we had sort of thought, and I think the board shared, that this was a property that could return back to residential use with the one or two family home. The question is now what feedback do we have and where do we go from here? I think the indications is that the preservation restriction that would run with the property did not assist in the sale of the property. It tended to reach into matters such as landscaping and interior work and so forth. And the question then becomes, well, how do we proceed from here? Following the end of the bid period, I did sit down with Mike McCall, my assistant. I sat down with John Souza, our finance director, who is, as his nature of his work, is engaged in the periodic disposition of tax title properties to the community in terms of the market and so forth. And John did reach out to his auctioning company that provides services to the town and asked him to review the RFP document and provide some feedback. I shared that with the board. Again, I think the sense is that if the town wishes to dispose of the property and recover as much of the cost that was invested in the property when it was acquired, then the preferred way at this point to move forward would be to return to the market, maintain the 1 and 2 family deed restriction that was discussed at town meeting, but perhaps waive the preservation restriction requirement and return the property to the same status of any other property in the community that falls under the town's demolition delay bylaw. And I think the effective way to do that right now would be to do an auction of the property, have that kind of a marketing and outreach effort, because we think that there were local people who were aware. We advertised it in the daily newspaper of the community. We promoted it on our website. We promoted it on the state's Central Register. We did all that we could, but I think at this point, my concern going forward is, we really do need to establish a floor, because what we don't want to do is have this property sold at a fire sale. We don't want somebody coming in here trying to seek it at a situation where the town is not getting a fair market value. And I think I don't know that if we went back with the same methodology in return that we would receive a much different result. I don't know if John has any comments he wants to add to this, or if the board has any questions in terms of where do we go here. We're sort of disappointing that we're now having to hold this property, what appears to be for another winter season, and it's just like I said, a disappointing and perhaps a surprising outcome.
This letter we got tonight from that family.
Mm-hmm. They visited the property with Mike McCall.
I was going to say, this isn't the first time
we heard that at town meeting. They've met with Mike in the office as well. We just don't see any evidence that they're able to accumulate the capital to acquire the property.
Is there any historic tax credits or not tax credits? Tax credits maybe erase them though, but as well as for those people, if they really have a. I don't think it's the ability to do it.
I just don't see any evidence of that.
Okay, that's all. I just wanted to. It was just a thought, that's all.
You had mentioned setting the bar, so to speak. How much, just remind me, how much we're into this house for?
We acquired it for, just under $500,000. Yeah.
It was 500?
Just under. It was just under, was it 490?
Just about 490.
490, and then, plus we've had carrying costs for this property.
Right.
The investment over the winter, we had ice damage
we've heat utilities.
But you also broke off a lot,
Yeah, we broke off
An acre.
backlands, yeah.
which is worth
But that's open space now.
Right,
so that's
right, it's
really-
open space,
That's still-
designated land.
worth
But it
something. So I mean that drops the value down.
Yeah, but it really wasn't subdividable in that sense. That's,
No, I
you know,
agree.
Right.
Is there any way to just make the restriction that it's gonna look generally the same? I mean, I got the feeling that's really where the board was going originally, that, someone's just not gonna make it modern
Well,
or.
the problem is you don't want the entire property to remain the same and that's why it didn't qualify for the state historic register, was because when you come up Mill Road and you see that historic, federal facade, that's historic. What happened was the property got added to with garages and all those things. Those aren't historic, and really those may not want to be maintained or really should not be maintained to the property. So you probably want to maintain the federal facing, but the other sides really don't add to the property. In fact, that they almost in fact detract from the property because it hinders the redevelopment effort.
Well, it seemed like
convert
that was part of the argument that was made from that email that you sent us, that
Right.
the preservation restriction was just so onerous to look at, to read. And I think I certainly felt that way, that,
You couldn't read it. It was
Right.
just,
What would the carrying cost be approximately, barring ice dams for the winter? What's it run a month? We're talking. Are we talking 10 grand a month, or are we talking?
We're probably looking at about that, say about 8, I think, we were paying last year. I mean, it was a really cold winter, we had to heat, but I mean, we did have some ice, we had some ice dams, we had, a fire alarm issue there. I mean, Gary had to really maintain that there was some work done in that building to have some maintenance and maintain it.
so is there any way just to talk about the front?
I think you could. I think you could say that the preservation,
And
not
that's
to
it.
alter whatever that direction is, the issue, that's.
But Mark the auctioneer, he pointed out one line in the preservation, which was an on-demand entrance to the home to evaluate. He said that was the big sticking point. Can't we just strike that piece?
well, I thought the restriction was not supposed to, apply to the interior. So I don't see the point in having that in there.
If you just wanted to look, you don't need to go inside.
Right.
You're looking
Right.
at it when you drive by it.
But we went into landscaping, and other aspects of the property. And I think he noted in his comments that it was a bit.
Well, what
onerous.
is our baseline goal? What are we trying to?
My understanding was I think the town was trying to recapture as much of its investment in the property and also prevent the whole. If you went back to the time of acquisition, the goal was to prevent a 40B project there. And therefore, if that's still the goal, then if you put a deed restriction that says it can only be used or 1 or 2 family dwelling, then that goal is achieved.
Right. But I think I'd rather let it go for less money with the deed restriction, someone buying it with the intent that they're going to make it look nice and keep it intact versus taking off the deed restriction, getting more money, and having somebody
Well,
turn it
the
into a.
deed restriction is different than the preservation restriction.
I'm sorry, the preservation restriction, removing that and turning it into a Class O 2 family or whatever, yeah. I'd rather maintain it and let it go for less money.
Well,
Right.
and I think that's,
Well, I don't think it's gonna go for less money if you change those. It's gonna go for more money because right now it's not going for anything.
I don't think if anybody realistically invested in that property that you would change the historic facade that we're talking about, short of demo, quite frankly. Because I think, quite frankly, if you were going to reinvest in that property, you would invest in the garage area and those added-on areas, either by eliminating them or adding to them, expanding those areas. I think that's really where the conundrum is on that property. It's not, you're not going to really achieve a lot by the other portions of the property that is the historic appearance as you come up, Mill Road.
If you could simply say that it has to be a 1 or 2 family residence by a deed restriction and that the frontal area maintain its colonial, whoever knows the correct language, and that's it. Because I think, John, you had a lot of interest, people going in and looking at it, didn't you?
There were a number of people that are in the professional in the construction and development field. Some from Chelmsford, some and they looked at it and they did not submit a bid. This is just my own personal opinion. With the preservation restriction the way it is, I mean, a couple of the things that the auctioneer pointed out is, like you called it, the on-demand entry, and it basically said if you were found in not to be in compliance with it, you could be subject to a lawsuit plus interest plus court costs. So It's just it's intimidating to a buyer. The other thing I would point out is and I'm all for maintaining the outward facade of the building, but when you look in the interior and those photos, even in the back of the preservation restriction, the previous owners altered a number of the significant details in that home. For example, the pictures you look at, they have suspended or acoustic tile ceilings like we have in this room, which you're not going to find in a colonial home. Other photos showed what I would call 1970s style paneling. That's not historic, that's not authentic to a colonial home of that era. So I think as buyers went in and were kind of struck with what was in there, and then facing a very onerous preservation restriction.
So who would we have in the town that could draft a?
Town council. Yeah, we'd have town council.
Why don't we send it there?
Yeah,
And come back and let's see where we are.
Yeah,
Okay.
if we could do that for our next
Okay,
meeting,
okay.
yeah.
Maybe
A
you
very
could speak to
short.
John and see
Sure.
what the
We
interest
can
was
come-
and what
okay.
some of the people who had an interest, what their ideas were, what they wanted to do with it. And maybe that would help them draft something that, you know what I mean?
Because I'm sure with that many people, you had interest at 300,000, but not at 600.
Right, and I think as you said, we would accept a little less if we could be assured it would not be demolished and something else built there.
Okay. All right, thank you. We'll come back next meeting.
Do you have a comment you want to make on that? If you could just be brief, we've had a long meeting.
Brian Latina, I was on the 101 Mill Road Committee for about 2 years, and one of the figures I heard, $100,000 to pay for that house. I'm stunned at that. Our figures were $15,000 a year for heat and hot water to maintain the building, not including any overhead that required younger Mr. Parlee to go in once a day after lunch and look at the house. As far as ice dams, the year that the ice dam was in that house, it hurt one of the soffit areas. It may have caused a little bit of dampness, but there wasn't a significant amount of work or cost or anything done to it. From what I could see in that same year, my house had ice dam problems as well. Everybody did. That was an odd year. Also, the folks that I talked about at town meeting and the letter you have there, we did not discover them during our 101 Mill Road discussion, and they came to us after the town meeting vote and were very upset they hadn't had an opportunity to come to us. Historic Commission didn't play a huge role in our committee. I think at this point, the ladies you see on that list will be very excited that the house wasn't sold and they have an opportunity to consider buying it. They've approached some investors. They've approached some folks in town with, quote, lots of money. They've approached folks for the name of the building itself, the Adams property. And I remind you that 2 presidents were descendants from that house. The mill itself is quite historic, and one of those ladies, actually, we worry about the kids falling off the dam next door. She fell off the dam next door as a 3-year-old. The outbuilding that you see there, you said it's not historically correct, has been there more than 80 years. And one of the ladies described that as that was the rabbit hutch, and the servants of that house lived in that section of the house. There was a huge barn that we didn't know about where the parking lot is. There were 2 outbuildings in that section that we cut off and made conservation property that we didn't know about either. These ladies knew quite a lot about it. So I think there's an opportunity for another resale of that property before you run to auction. I would argue that folks that were interested in the property are pretty savvy, and they may have heard that there wasn't going to be any bids or were ready to trot in if there were any people walking in. That would allow them to bid up to the number they were going to offer us as a blind auction. They certainly could get to that same number because I know at least one wanted it badly. These ladies also did. So please consider that in your deliberations.
Thanks, Brian.
John, one last question. Was there a minimum bid?
No.
So someone could have bid $1.
Mm-hmm. We had language to right to reject any and all bids.
Right.
But there was not a minimum in the RFP.
You didn't talk to these people, though. You said you did.
Mike has spoken with them.
Mike, okay.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah,
Yeah,
they've been in touch.
we'll see where it goes.
Okay.
Right.
The next is we have received notice from the Attorney General's office that they have approved the charter amendments that were acted upon at the fall annual town meeting. So therefore, they're available to now proceed to the ballot for the spring. And then the two that were home rule petitions have been submitted to the legislature. So hopefully there'll be some action on those in the spring as well.
Now, when we put those on the ballot, do we get to decide how they're worded, or do they have to be exactly the way they were on the?
We work with town council to determine the final language on that.
Okay.
They have to be descriptive of the votes at town meeting, but obviously, if you recall, some of them were quite lengthy.
Yes, okay, all right, thank you.
The final, next item on the, my report has to do with the update regarding the disposition of the UMass Lowell West Campus property. Last Thursday, at the request of the governor's office, Evan Belansky, Mike McCall, and I visited Ashburton Place next to the State House and met with representatives of the governor's office, representatives of the Department of Capital Asset Management, and also with representatives of UMass Lowell to discuss the disposition of the UMass Lowell West Campus property. And also the stake of the legislation regarding that would be introduced to facilitate the proceeds from the disposition to go back to the University of Mass Lowell. We obviously attended. It was the request, as I said, at the governor's office, because we had not had any action on this since way back almost a half year ago. At the meeting, we were asked to describe what the town's efforts had been to date. We explained that we had provided a report at fall annual town meeting, which reflected the preference of the community to have a 55-plus community there, senior assisted living type of community that would be compatible with the adjoining neighborhood. We also stated that that if the property remained vacant for the most of the last generation, and that if the governor's office would proceed with the release of funding to demo the vacated buildings that present a fire risk, that I think that would probably please the residents of the neighborhood the most. The response from the governor's office is that the governor's efforts across the Commonwealth are to put properties that are in inactive use back into a productive economic use for the benefit of the Commonwealth. We also informed them of the fact that what would be the future of that property, given the fact that the town's subsidized housing inventory, as certified by the Department of Housing and Community Development at the state level, is now at 9.2%. And that if you also account for the 164 units that were approved last week by the planning board on Turnpike Road, that upon certification of those units, the town's subsidized housing inventory would exceed 10%, which is the state mandated requirement for communities across the Commonwealth. And why that's relevant is, therefore, if there is to be a disposition of the UMass West campus, that the value of that property would not attain the high value of a high-density type of development on that property, residential development on that property. So we questioned at that point, look, the town of Chelmsford is not going to be an impediment to the state's process. It's within the rights of the university to dispose of the assets. It's within the rights of the legislature to assist the university, and that really the town was powerless other than to seek the support of our legislative delegation. However, the town is a steward of the state, along with, and we wish to obviously keep our relationship with the governor's office, our legislators, and the university, because we're all partners in this effort across the Commonwealth. But our concern was, well, what would they anticipate the value to be? Because we explained that any zoning change in that property would require a 2/3 vote at town meeting in Chelmsford, and we did not anticipate the likelihood of that for a housing development that would not be supported by the neighborhood or by the community as a whole. And in fact, I noted that I think Chelmsford's kind of suffering from housing fatigue right now, with the unprecedented number of developments that have been recently approved and are still coming through the pipeline As was noted earlier this evening, we have about 600 units, mostly apartments, that are coming through. There's still still an application before the Board of Appeals for Gorham Street. We still have the approved ability to file, but application not been filed yet for Brick Hill Road, and so forth. And we also know there's talk perhaps of residential development off of Groton Road up in North Chelmsford on some vacant land there. So we asked the university, well, would you proceed with this given the fact that you would not receive the same type of return that you would expect to have received under a high density type of development? And I guess we were a bit astonished by the fact that they said yes, that they wished to dispose of the property. It was not in their master plan. It's not in their future for the use of the property. And they wished to receive whatever economic revenue they could derive from the sale of the property. And their concern primarily was that they didn't want to wait for a 12 or 18-month period to give the town and the housing authority an option of whether or not to proceed with its own acquisition of the property. I informed the folks in the room that there was no identified municipal use for the property, that we did not need it for a school, it was not suitable for recreation land and so forth. There are obviously wetland areas of the property that are non-developable, but there really was no initiative that we saw in the town that the town would go forward with its own tax dollars to acquire the entire property or any significant developable portion of the property. I said, however, I think that issue is different from the housing authority or its affiliate. I informed them that David Hedison had recently met. George, you were at that meeting. Glenn was there. We had met with the residents in the neighborhood, and it was well received, his proposal for a 55-plus community, assisted living type of community. So to make a long story short, the outcome of the meeting is that the legislation will be filed, probably with the new legislative session taking place in January, to authorize the proceeds from the disposition of the property to revert to UMass Lowell. There will not be a right of first refusal to the town, and that the housing authority or any other entity, its affiliate or otherwise, could submit a bid either solely or in partnership with a private development to purchase, to acquire that property and to develop it. The process, I would anticipate, if your legislation is filed in January, perhaps you'd have action on that legislation late winter, early spring, and then by the time DCAM gets out to issue an RFP, they would then share with us the results of that RFP. You may be talking summer of 2018, where we may have something to come back in terms of proposed use. I did speak to David Hedison as recently as this afternoon. He was not troubled by this turn of events in terms of his interest in the property. He stated that if the DCAM issues a RFP for the property, that he would perhaps consider a proposal with through the housing authority's nonprofit affiliate with a other investor-based entities for this type of senior type of development. So he was not troubled by the fact of lack of this sort of holding period for the town of Chelmsford. The other difficulty with the holding period is that, and this is what I explained to be the concern, is during that period, if there were to be an exclusive window, how could we determine what the fair market value is of the property if it isn't out on the fair market? Because as we've shown by our efforts in the past, when the town obtained an appraisal and the university obtained an appraisal value, those values were significantly apart. And therefore, the feeling was that if it goes out to market, and David is part of that market, then clearly the end result will be a market-driven outcome, which would alleviate this uncertainty in terms of, is the town overpaying or underpaying? Because you can imagine the state had a concern on the other side that they didn't want to underpay, receive less revenue than the value of the property, and then have the town have a windfall. So that's where things stand at this moment. I did speak to Representative Tom Golden, updated him in terms of the results of this meeting, because given that it's in his representative district, he would be a contact if legislation were to be filed.
Was he aware of it, Paul?
He was aware of it. He was aware that discussions were taking place, and he still offers the same caveat that he would, if he hears objections or if the concept isn't supported by the Chelmsford Board of Selectmen, that he will not take any efforts to advance such legislation. So I did inform them that I'd be updating the board this evening and the community in terms of where things stand at this point.
Well, the key is that we still control zoning, and
Right.
it's only, right now, it's, under the current zoning, you could probably only build about 22 single-family homes in there, right? So
Right.
how much, I mean, that's our edge, if we have one.
Right.
I mean, is there any way the
And
state
and
can
the other,
overrule?
and the other concern in terms of the market value, which is what we talked about, was you also have remediation and perhaps demo costs on that property.
Sure.
Because we did the hazardous material assessment, and we know that our report came back $1.5 million to abate and dispose of the asbestos on that property. So you start looking at what the value might be for 20 single-family homes. You take out the remediation and demo and disposal costs, and then the development costs.
Cost of road.
Right, for the road and other, and utilities infrastructure. We also noted, the other thing you're gonna have, and we've seen this with other developments, is once they get a notice from the water district and from the town in terms of the
They may not have
the
the
water
capacity.
connection and capacity fee and the sewer connection and capacity fee, that also diminishes the value of the property. So that's why we felt, wait a minute, let's market test this as opposed to getting into a debate unproven in terms of what should be the acquisition price, and especially where the town wasn't anxious to step to the table and say, oh, yes, we want to preserve this property with tax dollars exclusively of the town. And so that's sort of, led to that outcome that afternoon of our discussion.
So are there only two certain outcomes at this point? One, it could be 20 single-family homes, or two, it cannot be a 40B because we've achieved our appropriate level.
Exactly.
Other than that,
Not
those are
without a
only two
zoning
certain
change.
outcomes.
Not without a zoning change, or a zoning change.
Right, which,
Somebody came to the other outcome would be they put out an RFP and somebody submits a proposal based on a zoning change. And then they come in and say, hey, we would pay $8 million if the zoning were to change. And then the question to the town would be, well, what would be worth your while to change the zoning out there? And of course, our concern would be, wait, what would the impacts be? Because if you wanted to change the zoning to provide greater density, you'd have to look at what are the outcomes of that, because as we know, and it was sort of early discussion this evening, if you do higher density, it means at least 10 of the units are 3 bedrooms, which then translate into operating costs and capital costs in the school system, which, we just spent $7 million expanding and don't have excess capacity. So
To
that's,
follow up on Glenn's question, though,
Yeah.
without a rezoning vote by
Right.
the town meeting,
Right.
all that can be built there is 20.
Right, 22, I think.
22
right,
units.
yes, exactly.
That's it.
That's right, exactly.
Really, that's the only choice without a town meeting vote.
Right.
So if
Well-
the housing authority were to come purchase the property, would they be requiring a zoning
No.
That would be
change
us.
to-
No, I mean, you could do a friendly 40B. That's what that would be. If the housing authority came in and did a friendly, even though you've hit 10%, you can do a friendly
Yeah.
development. So if David comes and says, I want to have a 55-plus assisted care community, and therefore I'm requiring additional units and allowed by zoning, the town could
But in
have.
a friendly form,
That would be
we
a
don't
town.
have more say as far as what it looks like and how it's
Exactly.
set up.
That'd be like.
can't just
so
Like the
someone could
committee
come
we
in and build what was envisioned by the committee that was set up to study it.
Exactly,
And right now, the state is kind of looking at their 101 Mill Road.
right. Exactly,
They got the same problem,
exactly.
that the
Well-
restrictions that their restrictions are expensive infrastructure
Right, there's a
will
real.
limit.
Right, there's a
revenue.
there's a tangible restrictions, because they have the prop buildings on site and has this material on site. And somebody private's probably gonna wanna do a 21E out there as well, which has not been conducted to date.
We wouldn't get any financing without it, I'm sure.
Right, so yes, they have logistical issues, that would affect the development of that site. So I think the only other thing that could happen, Laura, in the world of possibilities is would there be another state use for the property that would not involve the sale, the state could use it for, and that's not surfaced to date, but that, and we're just not aware of any such one. So it looks like everything that's being contemplated is
But it's ready to
disposition
go, though. So,
to
I
the
mean,
market.
You're talking about a serious amount of
Exactly, right.
investment, so. I mean,
Exactly.
it's probably not as likely to happen as.
Exactly, because the state's not, the state doesn't have that capacity right
I
now.
mean, they're trying to get rid of all their excess
Exactly.
land now just because they need the money, right?
Exactly.
But then they have to also fight the water department, which we have no control over. The water department doesn't have to grant them the water either.
But under a
You know,
friendly 40B,
we have a couple of trumps.
authority does go to the Board of Appeals. They can exercise leverage on, on that type of capacity, right? But in the private, market rate with.
It really was a surprise to the state for us to get to safe harbor.
Yeah, that was the game changer.
Yeah.
It was
It really dropped the value.
It really dropped the value on
Down
that property.
Like down to 25% of it or something.
Right.
roughly.
Yeah. I mean,
And handcuff the development to 20,
Right.
residential lots.
Paul,
Okay.
can I ask a question, is it possible?
I'm not.
Sure, Steve. Just make it quick, please.
Okay, real quick. I'm
You
just
can come to the, you can come to the
Go to the mic.
microphone.
Well, he can't do it that quick.
Thank
You
God
can
I
hit
signed
him
all
later,
George's
Steve.
papers, so he's all right with me. No, go back to this, Ann Wing had it for 30 years, and he gave it for educational purposes. You Lowell gets it for zero, pays zero taxes. Now, who has the power? Does the state have the power to sell that, Paul, or does University of Lowell sell it?
The way absent special legislation, the university could declare it surplus. It would then return to the general state of Commonwealth of Massachusetts to Department of Capital Asset Management. If they then had no identified state use or local use for the option, then it would go back. It would be sold, and the money would go to the state treasury. Why they want special legislation is they want to direct the proceeds back to the university. So the university's holding the asset. They will only release the asset if they get the money back.
He has a big say in the University of Lowell.
Yeah, because, absent action at the administrative level at the state, or, legislation, the university's going to hold the property until it's.
A friend of mine in Lowell just recently, about maybe months ago, when the chancellor gave, in lieu of taxes to Lowell, they gave $3 million, right?
Mm-hmm.
And he says, she gave the $3 million because they're going to get it back from Chelmsford when they buy that property. That was his comment, and I was saying to myself, he didn't know, but it made a lot of sense because it was a $3 million figure at that time, right? The property.
Ballpark.
How much?
Ballpark was a little.
Yeah, so there were numbers bandied about.
I know it's all over the ballpark, and $1.5 million to develop and all that.
Mm-hmm.
But we have a lot of seniors in town. That would just be a great piece of property, really, to
Okay.
pursue, But
Yep.
okay.
Thanks, Steve.
And then the last thing I want to report, just a footnote, but and since Darlene's here, she can also report it as well. We did receive notice since the last meeting, it just came in a couple days ago, about the Community Preservation Fund state match to the local. And this year, the match is 17.2%. So this year, we'll receive $175,885 in community preservation funds from the Commonwealth. Sad to report that that's the lowest dollar amount since the existence of the town program.
Probably the lowest percentage, too.
Lowest
right?
percentage, too. Well, and part of the reason for that is in recent years, the legislature has added funds from the surplus when the state closed out the fiscal year to the Community Preservation Fund. Well, this year, there was no closeout and no funds added. So just wanted to report, that we're putting $1 million into the fund this year, and the state's giving us 17.2%, or, $175,000.
Okay.
So, thank you. And I just have a couple of appointments for your consideration this evening. Seeking the board's confirmation for the appointment to the Board of Appeals as an alternate member of Jerry Lowe for a term expiring June 30th, 2019. To the Commission on Disabilities, Terry Doherty, for an unexpired term ending on June 30th, 2019. And to the Economic Development Commission, Sam Chase, for an unexpired 3-year term expiring June 30th, 2019.
You have a motion?
I'll make a motion to accept the town manager's appointments as presented.
I'll second the motion.
Okay, a motion and a second. Any questions, discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Thank you. Okay, we have 3 sets of minutes. For the first one, you were not at the meeting, so can we have somebody else make a motion?
Make a motion.
I'll second the motion.
All right, we have a motion from George and a second from Ken on the regular meeting minutes of September 25th. Any discussion? All in favor?
All right.
Aye. Any opposed? Okay. And the next one, I think you were there, right? Oh, no, you were not.
I'll make a motion to accept the minutes from October 16, 2017.
Second.
Okay, we have a motion and a second on October 16 minutes. Any discussion, corrections? All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? And you're going to abstain again? And the last one, you were there.
I'll make a motion to accept the regular meeting minutes of October 30th, 2017.
I'll second the motion.
Okay, a motion and a second. Any corrections, discussions? All in favor?
Aye.
Thank you. Okay, we have Selectmen liaison reports and referrals. We'll start with you, Glenn.
The Capital Group started meeting again, and there's about 4.8 million potential dollars tied up in projects. They'll be working their way through to come up with a final list, around 3 million. But the process has started, and we'll know more as time goes on. That's all.
That's it? Okay, Laura?
I have to, the Friends of the Robertsfield Playground, the committee has started work on trying to get the, what they need to do to select the playground design and get the bids and process as quickly as possible. And they were looking towards including a public input type of a forum as part of the bid process. But one of the things I did want to say here was that there was a lot of feedback at town meeting regarding the fact that the playground, the Robertsfield playground hadn't done any fundraising. And one of the so that was a topic that came up, and while there were plenty of ideas about fundraising, and the problem seems to be creating creating the forum to collect the money and getting a treasurer to fund that. I'm not really sure what the terminology is on that, but because of the nonprofit.
But you gotta set up the 501c.
The 501c,
Do all the
thank
filing,
you.
You gotta find an accountant to
So,
track it and do all that.
right now, they don't have anyone that has stepped forward to be a treasurer for that board, and they also have a few other vacancies on that boards as well. So I guess I would urge anyone who at town meeting who was there and really feels that the playground should be funded through some fundraising efforts, they really need someone to step up and help with this part, because they just don't have the staff to both do the playground design and run the fundraising. And so
I'm confused, because didn't we vote all the money to do it?
No.
we
Well,
voted.
They said they were going to do fundraising.
They said they were going, we voted the money to do it, and then they said they would try to do fundraising, and we could either offset the money and send it back, or put the fundraising towards future phases, depending on how that came about. But the problem is they just don't have a vehicle for the fundraising, and there's no one in the group that really has that expertise. And so I guess there was some Facebook requests for volunteers, but I don't believe anyone has stepped forward to date. And so,
Did town meeting put a restriction on that? I
No.
thought there was no restriction.
No, there's no restriction, but I think
There's no
the message was is that we,
Great effort.
We try,
there'd be
but if
effort,
they
right.
don't be successful, they can't put it together, they still get the money.
yes.
And I do know, like Bill Askin reached out to me to find out if I knew of a CPA or someone with an accounting background who could file the 501c.
Not you?
I'm not. So I know he's looking for that. So if anybody at home or anybody who has that background and can help with that, that's what they're looking for in order to set up the nonprofit status.
And they reached out to John Souza, the finance director, and I to see if the town could do it. And John, I know, was extensive with communicating to Bill that it's just not feasible for the town to do that role.
It would be,
Right.
put you in a tough position.
But they should be applauded. I mean, he's really trying
Trying.
to set up what he needs to do fundraising, because
But
he
if he
heard the
doesn't, he
feedback.
still gets the money.
That's true.
Right, but I think it was, the discussion at town meeting was not only the expense of this project, but also future projects, and, you know, what is the expectation to
Well,
fund these?
You know, I thought that part of it was a fast-track change at the site. So if he's going to take months to put this together, there's no fast track there. So I'm confused.
No, I think that the fundraising was sort of a parallel track. That
Yeah, they're
if
doing the
he
playground
could,
design.
they're going
They have
head.
to move forward with the design,
going
the
and going to-
procurement,
They're
construction.
gonna be trying to break ground for,
Spring.
you know, spring and opening day in June. That's kind of the plan. But town meeting was very upset that there was no fundraising effort, and they felt that some of this money should be turned back at the end of the project, type of thing.
There was nothing hard put in place to do that.
No, there is. And I think what happened
I mean, it's
behind the
good
scenes.
pay,
We're going in
but that's
circles.
all.
Yeah,
No, no,
that's all
but-
it is a good
That's,
faith.
Right.
that's all it
Behind the
is.
scenes, there was a lot of blowback to that committee about not doing the
But
fundraising.
the town meeting still
Well, I think
voted
they're
it.
trying to do the right thing. I think they're trying to do the
It did, but
fundraising.
there's
So all they're
nothing-
asking for is someone with an accounting background to help out so that they can try to make an effort to raise some money.
Right.
That's what they're asking for.
Good for them.
So you keep us informed.
I will.
Okay, do you have anything else?
That is all for this evening.
Okay, Ken?
Thank you.
I don't have anything to report, but I'd like to say thank you to the people that decorated the town this weekend. It's nice to see starting to get a little bit into the holiday spirit as you drive around.
George?
I just want to wish everybody a happy Thanksgiving, and I hope everyone has a chance to enjoy their families, and go Lions. That's it. You get a chance to have a winning record, so.
There you
Oh,
go.
my youngest son was asked to dress for varsity. He's a freshman. So that was a nice.
You have some eligibility left.
Yeah.
don't you?
Yeah, there you go.
I gotta
You
give
probably
him a
do-
pat on the back.
You probably do too, George, right?
No, I'm not eligible for anything.
Okay, I have three quick things. First of all, we have a new police officer in town. His name is Shane Melissy. He graduated the Lowell Police Academy a couple of weeks ago. So welcome to Shane, and I'm sure you'll see him tooling around town in a cruiser sometime soon. Just hope you don't see the red lights flashing while he's behind you.
You just give warnings.
Maybe
There you go.
Flip.
We have our Prelude on December 3rd, but the day before that, on December 2nd, Saturday, North Chelmsford is having their annual tree lighting from 4:30 to 6. So if you're available on December 2nd from 4:30 to 6, they have, it's a great event. I've been a few times, and they do a good job. So everybody should go to that. And lastly, I want to congratulate Mary Conti, who on Thanksgiving Day is going to turn 100 years old. They had a birthday party for her at the senior center today, and it was very well attended, and Mary gets around Mary Conti. She gets around very well. She has all her faculties, good for her. I hope I look half as good when I get to be close to that.
I think we should mention one more thing, that thank the organizers for the Veterans Day activities.
Oh, yeah.
It was extremely well attended. It was very cold and
it
very
was.
windy. But we had a tremendous crowd there, and was a tribute to those who have served Chelmsford in the past.
I just hope that the speeches are a little longer next year.
Yeah, maybe we can work on that. All right, so we have any press questions?
would
Only
be
if
colder.
you'll allow me to file my story from here, because I have 30 minutes to do so.
Yes,
Thank you.
but, so do you have questions?
No, I'm all set.
Okay. Do we have any questions in the back from the Independent? If he would be listening and paying attention instead of chatting back there, maybe he could answer my question. Do you have any questions? Thank you. All right, our next meeting is December 4th. Do we have a motion to adjourn?
I'll make,
I know, I'm with Applebee's for a liquor license change, and I was told I had to attend this meeting. I have a letter from the town.
You're not on our agenda.
What's the request?
What is it
The
for?
liquor license is being changed into my name. From Applebee, it was a change in management.
Those are, I don't know what happened in terms of why you didn't make the agenda, but those have been
Those
perfunctory.
typically have been very automatic,
Yeah.
because you're doing it across the, is probably not one that's done across the state, or is it?
It's probably gotta,
No,
it's gotta go
I
with
took over
ABC.
as the general manager.
Right.
So the liquor license just needs to be changed over to me.
Was it, is that something that requires a public hearing or not? That,
Yeah, change of manager.
okay, it should require a public hearing,
I
and,
don't know, I was told to be at the, I have the letter that says to be here tonight, 7:00.
well, I apologize for making you wait.
We're doing license renewals at the next meeting. We can, it won't, it really won't have a substantive delay, because that would have to get submitted with the state as
Right.
well, so.
All the signatures have been done, the applications have been done, I was told to be here.
Yeah, unfortunately, we can't take a vote on that tonight, because it wasn't on our agenda, and it looks like it probably was not adequately advertised, but when are you planning on starting? As Paul said, it would have, it would have to go through the ABCC anyway.
I've got
so-
all, that's all been done.
For the
It's-
renewal.
It's at the town level, and that's why they told me to be here.
Okay,
We would get it before the ABC.
Yeah,
wouldn't
exactly.
We
We're doing all the
usually do.
renewals next meeting. You're doing all the license renewals, so maybe there was a confusion on the date, but
Right, but it wasn't a license renewal. That's,
the change of
that's
manager.
also going
Right, that's
through
also
there,
going
yeah.
through as
Right.
well. But we can, I don't know what you can
Does
do.
it affect the operation
Really,
of
it's
the
really not gonna
business
affect,
right
it's not gonna
now?
affect your operation for
It's
the next 2
not,
weeks.
no, not at
And
all.
we'll wait.
She's been sitting here all night.
Yeah, that's why I feel
Say-
bad.
Exactly.
Yeah, sorry to have you.
And I don't wanna do this again, you know, I'm supposed to be at work.
well,
Can we put it early on in the agenda?
we can absolutely do that, if,
So that we can
if we
move it
even,
along
if we
quickly.
even have to have you come back.
Yeah,
I mean,
I'm not saying, I probably wouldn't necessarily for her to come back, because obviously the Corey investigation is the key.
if the
component.
ABCC has approved it, then
Exactly.
that's a
Everybody
higher
I've been
level
told
than what we
by,
are.
Yeah.
I think Christine in an office,
Yeah.
that everybody's approved it.
Okay, we'll put it on our agenda for the next meeting, and you're not required to attend, but if you'd like to attend, it'll be near the beginning of the meeting, so I guarantee you'll be out of here before 10 o'clock.
Sorry for that. All right, I don't know.
Okay, so now do we have a motion to adjourn?
I'll make a motion to adjourn the meeting.
I will second the motion to adjourn.
Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Thank you.